for being with us today for the July 10th meeting of the Bloomington Plan Commission. We're going to get started today. We have one remote commissioner, so I want to make sure, thank you, Ron Smith, for waving. And we have two absences tonight. We knew Brad Whistler was not going to be here, so I'm in as his vice here today, or I will chair the meeting in his absence. So we want to start. We have a long agenda tonight, and most of you, I hope, are here to be a part of some of that agenda. We'll start the meeting, at least I'm going to go over a quick review of our agenda before we do the official roll. Is that okay? Check it. Yep. So we have a long agenda tonight. Some of it will be handled pretty swiftly because of how it's on our agenda. But we have some minutes to be approved. We did not meet in June, so we have May meeting minutes to approve. We have some action to take that is related to appointing committee members. We have an administrative manual update, and then we have a petition tabled, SP 2422, that will not be discussed tonight. And then we have two petitions continued, SP 2123, True Storage LLC, and well, I should say one petition that's going to be continued. And then we have two petitions on the consent agenda, and those generally represent non-controversial petitions that should be handled swiftly, smoothly. They should be easy for us. But these petitions can be removed from a consent agenda based on any commissioners who have a concern about anything in them, or by request of the public to remove them if you want them to be discussed. And those are SP 1922, People's State Bank, and SP 2522, Strausser Construction. We'll march through that a little more deliberately after we've officially called roll to see if anyone wants those to be discussed in full. However, they're both one-year extensions, and we heard them just actually almost a year ago exactly. So I don't know if there's anything controversial or germane in those two. However, that's up for us to decide. The body of the meeting is for the two petitions before us, PUD 1823 and DP 2323. The first is the Sudbury Development Partners, LLC, and the second, DP 2323, is Hopewell West, the Bloomington Redevelopment Commission. So we have a lot of substance to discuss tonight, and I'm happy to see a nice crowd gathered here tonight, which means that you at least were all informed with this meeting, so that's fabulous. I'm glad you're here and hope there might be some other folks online joining us tonight. So before we get started, I think we probably should do the roll here to make sure that we're fully accounted for.
Thank you. Ballard?
Here.
Burrell?
Here.
Cockrum?
Here.
Seabour?
Here.
Kinsey?
Here.
Smith? And thanks. Yeah, you're a little quiet, Ron. See if I can turn you up.
I'll speak up.
Great, thank you so much. And St. John? Here. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so we are present and we have quorum, so we can fully conduct this meeting. Jackie, would you like to talk about the agenda?
Sure.
No,
Yeah, I can go ahead. So a couple of things. I believe that we do have minutes to approve. Those are from the May meeting because we didn't have a June meeting. Those minutes weren't approved. So that was an error on the agenda posted in the packet. So if we could approve the May minutes, which you would have, I believe, received as well separately last month, that would be great. Then we will do a plat committee appointment for a new alternate for engineering staff. We have an administrative manual update from the hand department. And then we are asking you all to consider switching the two petitions that are on the agenda. So numerically, Sudbury Development Partners is listed first, and Hopewell West is listed second. For a couple of reasons, we are asking that you hear Hopewell West first. One, I think it's slightly less controversial and could probably go quicker. So if we can hear it and get it out of the way, then you all could focus on Sudbury without concern for our time limit. So for those who don't know, we do have an end time that we have to follow, which is 9:30. We also have a time after which we can't hear new items, which is 9 o'clock. The redevelopment commission petition is an integral part of a affordable housing project planning to go forward at the Core building. And if it isn't heard tonight, for example, if Sudbury took more than 3.5 or 4 hours, which it is quite meaty, so theoretically could happen, then that project would not be able to go forward, and because you would have to hear the petition next month. So while it is a little bit atypical, if we could have just put them on in the swapped order, we would have, but we put them on in the order in which they're filed. So because Sudbury had intended to go last month initially, they have a lower number. So we're asking that you vote to switch that. And again, for the many of you who I assume are here for the Sudbury petition, we are expecting that the Hopewell petition will go quickly, and then we can focus on making sure we give enough time and credence to the Sudbury questions. And so we're asking that you consider that tonight. Thank you. Oh, I should have said, I'm the Development Services Manager, Jackie Scanlon, for Planning and Transportation. Thank you.
And just to clarify, in order to make this agenda shift, we do need a vote, and it
Yes.
neast to be unanimous.
It does not need to be unanimous.
Okay.
It just needs to be a regular majority.
Okay, all right. So before we proceed with that, I wonder if any commissioners have a question or comment about this agenda change. Anybody
I
have
will
any-
say for the record, sorry, that Mr. Enright Randolph has just joined, and he is on Zoom and also raising his hand, so may have a comment for this. Thank you.
Great.
No comment here, just wanted to be added as co-host. Sorry, just trying to get your attention.
Oh, you're good. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Tran. So I think this is a reasonable request to shift the items in the agenda, mostly because we don't want to end up not talking about Hopewell and have it not be discussed tonight just because of a longer comment period for the Sudbury, which I think we're anticipating. But perhaps a question might go out to the audience here tonight. Just a show of hands, how many of you are here to talk about Sudbury? Is that just to get a sense? All right. Okay, or I shouldn't say you're here to hear, you don't have to declare your intent to speak, but just that you have an interest in the Sudbury conversation. Okay, all right, okay. I think one of the concerns, of course, is that we have advertised the order of the agenda in a particular way, and people might have allotted their time here tonight, either virtually or in person, based on what they saw advertised for this event. And I don't want to mess up people's evening based on what they expected to happen. We can't say for sure. We're not trying to dispense with the Hopewell project in swift order. That really isn't the goal here, and nor are we trying to give it short shrift by trying to speed it through. But I do think that we are anticipating a longer discussion of the Sudbury and don't want to end up essentially timing out on the Hopewell discussion. So that's the concern here. Any other concerns that folks see about shifting this agenda? If we're okay with it, okay, I'm doing a little audience read here for this shift. All right. Okay, I do think it's advisable. We don't want to time ourselves out here, and I think we're all probably interested in trying to conclude our meeting by 9, I hope. All right. Yeah? Okay. Anyone want to propose the agenda change?
Do that. Move approval to change the agenda of the July 10th meeting to flip, as a legal term, flip 2 items on the agenda so that we hear DP-23-23 Hopewell West before we hear PUD-18-23.
Do I have a second?
And I'll second.
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion and a second, and do we need to hear, Mike, anything from the members?
You're welcome to ask if members want to speak about it. You asked previously, but it does have to be a roll call vote.
Okay, all right. Okay, and we don't need to ask any public comment on this change, do we?
Not on this motion.
Okay, all right. Okay, so Any comments on this further? Okay. All right, so we're voting on just swapping the two agenda items and hearing the Hopewell petition first and Sudbury second.
Sorry, just checking up here what we have go, something happened. Okay. Burrell,
Yes.
Cockrum,
Yes.
Seabour,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
and Ballard.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right. Okay, well, we'll hope we'll get through this quickly. Okay, so with that agenda change in mind, let's try and start speeding through our agenda here. So the first order of business is minutes to be approved. For, again, clarifying, it says on our agenda none, but it's actually May 15th. Anyone want to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes from the May, you say 15th?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and second. I did notice one needed correction in the minutes. The date is indicated erroneously as April 10th, which seems to just be a typo or carryover. It actually was May 15th in the body of the minutes.
Great, we'll
That
change
seems to be the only error. All right, and if everybody's okay with that modest trivial correction, important, but
So we'll let the motion show the motion is to approve the minutes as corrected. Is that correct?
as corrected. Yes, is that okay with those who made the motion? All right. All right, with that correction, all right, we ready to vote?
Great. Cockrum,
Yes.
Seabour,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
and Burrell.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, all right. Okay, so now we're on to staff reports, resolutions, and communications, or commissioner communications.
Okay, let's see. Staff reports, resolutions, and communications. First, our alternate member of the engineering staff for the Plat Committee has moved on to another position. So we need a vote we would like for you to vote to appoint Maria McCormick as the engineering staff alternate. She is the current public improvements manager, and a number of staff members who have held that position in the past have held the alternate position. So the main member will still be Roy Ayton, and then Maria would be the alternate. So we need a vote to slot her into that position. Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion to approve Maria McCormick as the alternate for the Plat Committee?
I don't know that we actually got a motion.
Do we have to?
She just suggested it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We do need a vote.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
I'll motion that we approve Maria McCormick as the alternate to the Plat
Thank you.
Committee.
Yep.
Second.
Thank you. All right. And we'll vote on this one.
Great. Yeah, we have to roll call all votes since
Yeah,
Ron is
roll
virtual.
Yeah, exactly.
Seabour,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Cockrum.
Yes.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Administrative manual update?
Update about the administrative manual. Thank you. So let me see here. I'm going to try to share my screen here in a second. So the administrative manual is kind of a companion for the Unified Development Ordinance, and most of what's in the administrative manual is process or development details that were decided to be put kind of in the separate document so that they could be updated more regularly. Let's see if I can make this bigger.
Yeah, just a little boost here might help.
Sure, you're fine. Just a second. It's hard. So the change that we are letting you know about today, you do not have to vote on it, this is just informational for you, is related to the way that the workforce housing, when someone is, doing a payment in lieu for workforce housing, how those numbers are derived. So the numbers that are currently in the administrative manual are from when we wrote the administrative manual, and it needs to be updated annually. So internally, the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department does update those with new projects, but this document needed to be updated to reflect that. So again, you don't need to vote on it, but we just wanted to make you aware that that was happening. There is a new staff person in that position who's being very proactive about making sure that we're keeping all of this in line as we take on more and more units, so that's great. So these numbers have been updated. And then that also updates the table here. Again, the numbers that were originally in the document reflect the 2019 values, and obviously that was 4 years ago, so they have been updated. And I know Mr. Zodi's here if you have anything to add, or I think we're good. I can try to answer any questions.
Yeah, I do have a question. Is this an expectation that it would be updated annually? Is this something that would change annually or need to be updated annually?
It is based on, oh, here comes Mr. Robinson. He can explain it. Thanks.
Scott Robinson, Director of Planning and Transportation. Yes, it is updated annually. I think we missed a little bit of cycle. HUD publishes these rates annually, I believe, in June. And so that's why the timing is right now, is we need to wait for HUD to publish the rates, and then we calculate those rates to update in the administrative manual. So we try to get before you every June or July to reflect those changes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions for staff about this?
So that
Okay.
document will be updated and uploaded to the website with the updated numbers this week, just so you know.
Thank you. Important for us to know, and important for us to be, not necessarily for us, but for the city to be transparent with people who might want to take advantage of this. All right. Okay. Thank you for the information. We don't need to vote. All right. Okay. So just to, any other commissioner reports or resolutions? I should have asked that. Anybody have anything?
I had one more thing. Mr. Robinson, I believe, sent you all an email about fundamentals, which is a training opportunity, but it has the word fun in it, so it's more exciting than the other ones. And I believe there are 2 opportunities, August 2nd and 3rd, and August 9th and 10th. One of our goals as a department is to have a certain number, a handful of commissioners or board members do training every year if possible. So if that's something you're interested in, please let us know and we can help facilitate that for you. Thanks.
Thank you for that notice, and thanks for Director Robinson for providing that information to us and support for our participation. All right, so any commissioners have anything they want to say? Mr. Smith, okay. All right, okay. All right, so now we have, just by order of the agenda, we have a tabled petition for SP 2422, so that one just stays as it is. We have a petition continued to our next meeting, SP 2123, that stays. And then we have a consent agenda is next. And as I said earlier, the consent agenda is really a space, a practice that we've adopted within the last couple years here to handle non-controversial petitions. It tends to speed the process, make sure that we are keeping a place for anything that really just subscribes or has nothing about it that deserves or needs or requires additional attention. It kind of follows the letter of our documents and our processes. So the 2 that are in this state are both asking or requesting, they're similar in that they're both requesting 1-year extensions. Since we just saw these and approved them July 11th, 2022, they're still pretty recent. Obviously, but though that they need to request a 1-year extension because it is now a year later, so they need to request an extension. So this is a non-controversial issue on the consent agenda. However, since we have people in the room today, I feel more compelled to ask if anyone is here who wants any of this considered, and of course, extend the same offer to commissioners present. If nothing, we will just move approval of a consent agenda, and we would accept that motion to handle these 2 petitions. Anyone? Nobody on Zoom wanting to put these as a matter of discussion?
Nothing on Zoom.
Okay. All right. So we do need to have a motion and a vote to approve the items are on the
I
consent.
motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second that.
Thank you. All right.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Ballard?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
Cockrum?
Yes.
And Seaboard.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right. Moving right along to our petitions tonight. So with our agenda shift here, we will consider DP 2323 Hopewell West, Bloomington Redevelopment Commission. This is the property west of South Rogers Street between West 1st and West 2nd Street. The request is for a primary plat approval to create new lots and a new right-of-way in the Hopewell neighborhood with a request for subdivision waivers and waiver of a second hearing. And I think we're going to hear from our case manager, Gabriel Halborough, on this one.
The presentation. Actually, can I share or do I need to be a co-host? I'll start with, I am Gabriel Holbrow, zoning planner for the Planning and Transportation Department. Okay, this is for petition DP 2323, also numbered plat 2023-06-0005 for what we're calling Hopewell West. This is the former IU Health Bloomington Hospital site, or it's a portion of that. The petition this evening is for primary plat for a subdivision of the portion of the former hospital site that's west of Rogers Street between 2nd Street to the north and 1st Street to the south. And then there are adjacent properties, not part of the petition, to the west. As Vice President Kinsey pointed out, to the east of Rogers Street was the area known as Hopewell Phase 1 East that previously received primary plat approval, actually twice, by this commission. So this is another section of this area. The petition this evening is for a subdivision to create new lots and new rights-of-way in this area. It doesn't include any new buildings. The total area of the petition is 11.33 acres. It's zoned mixed use, medium scale, and it's also within the transform redevelopment overlay. In the comprehensive plan, it's designated as mixed urban residential and also is part of the former Bloomington Hospital focus area that's discussed in the comprehensive plan. The existing land use, it's vacant. It's the side of the former hospital. Most of the buildings have been taken down. The petitioner is, the owner is the City of Bloomington and the Bloomington Redevelopment Authority, Redevelopment Commission, RDC. They hold a purchase agreement for the property purchasing from IU Health for these properties and adjacent ones as well, including the ones in Hopewell East. And the RDC has engaged the petitioner, Crossroad Engineers, along with consultants Bledsoe, Rigger, Cooper, James, BRCJ, and Rundle, Ernst Berger Associates, REA, and RDC has engaged them to provide engineering design for Hopewell West, including platting and road design. So the petitioner is a Crossroad Engineer. So the petitioner is requesting primary plat approval to reconfigure the existing lots and rights-of-way in this portion of the master plan area. And the entire area of the former hospital site is covered by and guided by the Bloomington Hospital Site Redevelopment Master Plan, which was released in January 2021. So this is for this part of the master plan. It's to recreate an urban pattern of streets, alleys, and blocks to facilitate redevelopment. It creates new public rights-of-way for two new north-south streets. You can see there on the left is Fairview Street, and on the right is Jackson Street. Both of them connect all the way from 2nd to 1st. There's also an east-west street, West University Street. It's an east-west greenway, as you can see there in the center. There are also several alleys in each of the portions. There are 2 existing buildings on the site that have not been demolished. One is the existing parking garage. Existing parking garage and on the upper center of the screen, and then the core building in the lower right, southeast corner. The core building was the former hospital administration building. It's a locally designated historic district, and there is a plan underway for redevelopment as affordable housing. As was mentioned a little earlier. There are also 2 existing alleys in the northeast corner. These will need to be vacated in order for this plat to go forward. Right-of-way vacation is done by City Council. So one of the recommended conditions of primary plat approval is that these alleys be vacated by City Council, and so that will go on City Council's agenda when they're ready for it. These 2 alleys from an old subdivision are proposed to be vacated, and then the new proposed plat would provide alleys and other configurations throughout the site. Along the West University Greenway, there are 4 lots that are green space lots. Following the master plan for the area, these are intended to be managed by City of Bloomington Parks and Recreation as public park space, containing park amenities as well as stormwater drainage facilities for the neighborhood. On the plat that's submitted here, they're labeled as common areas. They're common areas 2 through 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The Unified Development Ordinance defines common area in a way that explicitly excludes anything that's to be dedicated to the public. So unfortunately, these don't meet the definition of common area. This is really just a minor thing, but staff does recommend a condition that these be correctly labeled as lots on the secondary plat. There's a 5th common area. We'll get to that a little bit. That will almost certainly change its configuration and purpose. It may end up being that the remainder of it is still common area, or it may be that it's more like a greenway lot. So that can be, as needed, when that's changed, the secondary plat can show that as what it actually will be. There are a few, I do want to highlight the parts of this petition that are require subdivision waivers, or there are unusual things, or there are questions about. So I'm going to be talking about all the things that aren't quite straight to code. But I don't want that to distract you from the fact that as a whole, this is full of code compliant things. They're doing a lot of things that are exactly what the code, the UDO general, and also the transform redevelopment overlay is asking for, and the master plan are asking for. So there's a lot about this that is compliant. I'm just not going to be talking about those. If you have any questions about any of those, I, as staff, or the petitioners would be happy to address those. So going into some of the things they're asking for, one of the things is that the UDO gives you the authority to waive the petition fee because it is supported by the city. In this case, the owner is the Redevelopment Commission, the RDC. Staff recommends that you waive the fee. No fee has been collected yet, so that's one part of it. They're also requesting several subdivision waivers. So as you may recall, subdivision waivers are a request to do something a little bit different from the standards that are listed, subdivision standards that are listed in the UDO, but you have the authority as the Plan Commission to grant those to be a little bit different. So the first one is the parent tract size maximum. The maximum in the TRO is 3 acres, and this is proposed to be 11.33 acres. And this is really because this along with Hopewell East, which came through before the TRO was established, they're really unique parts of the redevelopment process. It's a stage that calls for a wholesale redesign of the streets and lots in the area to create a new grid. The relatively larger area covered by the plat is a necessary and integral aspect of the proposal. The proposal complies with development standards and follows the guidance of the comprehensive plan, the transportation plan, and the Bloomington Hospital Site Redevelopment Master Plan. The proposed finding is that the waiver will not be detrimental to the public, is unique to the property and the timing of the proposal, and complies with development standards and guiding plans. There's also a requirement in the TRO that 100% of lots be served by alleys. The lots, the green space lots along the West University Greenway do not have alley access. This is in recognition of they're not meant to be developed with buildings. They're going to be park space essentially. And so the access requirements are going to be different, and the petitioner believes that it better serves the goals of development to not have alley access to those lots. And the plat does show proposals for pedestrian easements that would provide access to each of those lots from the side opposite the frontage. The proposed finding is that granting the waiver will not be detrimental to the public, is unique to the circumstances of the lots to which the waiver applies, and complies with development standards in the intent of the guiding plans. The next subdivision waiver request is for property line corner radii at intersections. As you can see there on the left, this is an example from a completely different plat. It just shows you what a rounded corner looks like. The UDO expects that at intersections of streets and alleys, that property corners be rounded to give more opportunity to use right-of-way along the corner as the city desires for transportation and other uses of the right-of-way. What's proposed is, this is not a very clear clip, but it's zooming in on a corner of one of the proposed lots. This is from the proposed primary plat here. And you can see that all the corners are right angle square corners. The petitioner has stated that the property corners are necessary to accommodate the goals of the development as guided by the master plan. The street and lot designs provide adequate space for vehicle turning movements and sight lines. And those are parts of the proposed finding, which concludes with granting the waiver will not be detrimental to the public, is unique to the site, and complies with development standards and the intent of the guiding plans. The next subdivision waiver is for tree plot width. In the transportation plan, the minimum tree plot width is 5 feet, and that's what they're showing. So this is zooming, I do want to highlight, this is zooming in on one of the 4 street cross sections for the internal streets that are shown in the building plans. So this is the minimum. 5 feet is the minimum tree plot width that's provided in these plans. The tree plot width varies, and along the West University Greenway, it's up to 40 feet. So in some places, it's well above. So the minimum, according to the transportation plan, is 5 feet, which is what's shown. However, the TRO, the minimum requirement is at least 7 feet, or what's in the transportation plan, whichever is greater. So in this case, the TRO subdivision standards would be for a 7-foot tree plot, 7-foot greenscape along all these streets So many of the parts of the streets that are shown in the plan have much wider greenscapes along the streets, tree plots along the streets, but there are sections that are only 5 feet. The proposed finding mentions that requiring the TRO minimums would require additional right-of-way dedication in some locations, and that would exceed the minimum right-of-way width requirements that's in the transportation plan. And the number of required street trees will remain the same, even if the waiver is granted. Granting the waiver will not be detrimental to the public is unique because of the constraints of right-of-way location created by existing facilities that will remain and complies with the intent of the transportation plan. The next subdivision waiver is similar. It's for pedestrian facility widths along the street. The transportation plan generally calls for a minimum 6-foot pedestrian zone, or usually sidewalk. However, the TRO requires that it be a minimum of 8 feet. What they're showing here, again, this is the minimum that's provided. So other parts of the plat, particularly along the West University Greenway, do show quite a bit wider sidewalks. But there are portions where the sidewalk is only 6 feet. The proposed finding is that, again, it's essentially the same language as the previous one about tree plots. Requiring the TRO minimums would require additional right-of-way dedication, exceeding the minimum right-of-way width requirements from the transportation plan. Granting the waiver will not be detrimental to the public is unique because of the constraints of right-of-way location created by existing facilities that will remain and complies with the intent of the transportation plan. So those are the requested subdivision waivers. When there are subdivision waivers, the base requirement is that there be 2 public hearings. However, the Plan Commission can waive the second public hearing, and the petitioner has requested that. That's based on the idea that tonight there should be enough time to adequately air any issues and resolve any questions that people have. So that's part of the request, is to waive the second hearing. So on to another aspect of the plat. The transportation plan calls for a new connection labeled as NC 45 NC for new connection, quote, to create a new east-west connection from South Walker Street to South Rogers Street between East 1st Street and East 2nd Street. You can see down there sort of in the bottom of the image, a little fuzzy NC 45, and that magenta line, vertical magenta line to the right is Rogers Street, and then the vertical gray line to the left is Walker Street, and Walker Street is quite a bit west of this, so the transportation plan calls for a new connection all the way through. When that happens with any subdivision proposal, the UDO requires that the street right-of-way be taken all the way to the edge of the subdivided tract. And if necessary, an appropriate stub street could be put in. So here we have, so there's NC 45. Here, this is zooming in on a portion of the plat. In the center of the image, vertically is Fairview Street, and you can see University Street Greenway coming in from the right, and it ends at Fairview Street, it doesn't continue to the west. So the requirement of the transportation plan would be for a new right-of-way dedication along there. And you notice it's a weird shape because the RDC does not have control over the property that's below it there that cuts into that area. So the right-of-way dedication should be in line with West University Street that's proposed in this plat, but it can't be completed at this time, but it should be set up so that if and when lots to the west are developed, there will be room for continuing West University Street in that area. I do want to highlight in the same general area that what's labeled as Common Area 1 right now does have this 15-foot strip along the west side of Fairview Street. This is not ideal. It should be converted to excess right-of-way or additional right-of-way for Fairview Street. If at a later time that's developed, it could be vacated, or there could be, so that it would become a part of the developable lot to the west, or there could be encroachments on it, or it could simply remain a wider green space. But having it as simply a lot there doesn't seem ideal. So staff recommends a condition as part of the additional right-of-way dedication that this be simply converted to a right-of-way. Another issue is along Rogers Street on the west side of the plat. There is a proposed concept, or maybe proposed is already too strong a word, but there is a concept design for how to redesign that street and have all the facilities that we want to see in there, bicycle facilities, sidewalks, tree plot. This concept design was referenced in the staff report, and it said attached, and then it wasn't actually in the packet. So any members of the public who wanted to look for it, you wouldn't have seen it because due to staff error, it wasn't in there. So I sent it to the commissioners earlier today, and it's up here on the screen for everyone to see as well. Zooming in, roughly the part on the left is south of University Street, part on the right is north of University Street. On the left, it's narrower because of constraints of existing buildings and the topography. And the right-of-way dedication that they're showing on the plat as required by the transportation plan is plenty enough to fit all that. So that's not a problem. It's north of University Street, as you can see on the right, and we'll zoom in here. Oops. This is turning on its side again. So on this north is to the right, west is up. This is where Rogers Street comes into 2nd Street. And this is a snip of that conceptual cross-section showing a sidewalk, a bicycle track, greenway, travel lanes, turn lane. If you add up all these widths and then have a foot on either side as required by the UDO, we need 82 feet. And due to the existing width from the center line of the road on the east side that was platted as part of Hopewell Phase 1 East, going 42 feet from the center line as shown on the plat and as otherwise required by the transportation plan doesn't give us enough room. So based on wanting to achieve something like this, it seems that more right-of-way dedication would be necessary. However, the staff, as you read in the staff report, we didn't put that as necessarily a recommended condition. If there can be some proposal for how to configure the facilities and the different turning lanes and travel lanes within the available right-of-way with only 42 feet of dedication from center line, that could be okay as well. So that's an issue there. Now this is about the lot depth to width ratio. The requirement is that lots have a depth to width ratio not exceeding 4:1. In the staff report, it noted that lots 19 through 25 are long and narrow, but said that their depth to width ratio is just under 4:1. That was a division error. In truth, they are just over 4:1. So we're adding, you'll see in a moment a slide, we're proposing an additional condition of approval that would say the 7 lots that are numbered 19 through 25 and are currently each 35 feet wide should be reconfigured to be 6 lots so that all of them are wide enough to not exceed the 4:1 depth to width ratio with a depth of 154.5 feet. In conclusion, the proposed primary plat with the requested waivers and recommended conditions will meet all of the requirements in the UDO. As part of the redevelopment of the area included in the master plan, this primary plat will set up Hopewell West with improved public ways and new amenities, as well as create parcels that can be developed separately or combined. The Planning and Transportation Department recommends that the Plan Commission adopt the proposed findings, some of which we went over in this presentation, and the standard findings are in the staff report. Recommends that the commission adopt the proposed findings, waive the application fee, waive the second hearing, and approve the primary plat with all associated waivers and with the following conditions. And those conditions are, first of all, that right-of-way vacation for the existing alleys on the petition site shall be approved by Common Council prior to secondary plat recording. Number two, that the green space lots intended for public use that are labeled as Common Area 2 through Common Area 5 on the primary plat shall be correctly labeled as lots on the secondary plat. Number three, that the secondary plat shall provide public right-of-way for West University Street west of South Fairview Street and C45 in the transportation plan to provide the opportunity for a future street connection to the west. The 332-foot-long portion of the proposed Common Area 1 parcel shall be included in the Fairview Street right-of-way, and the northern portion may need to be absorbed into Lot 2. And the fourth is new, that was not in the staff packet because this was noticed after the packet went out. The recommended condition, number 4, is the 7 lots labeled 19 through 25 shall be reduced to 6 lots on the secondary plat so that all 6 lots have a depth to width ratio not exceeding 4:1. That's my staff report. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Gabriel. And if we have the petitioner here, the Crossroads engineer, do we have a representative? Great. Okay, and if you could begin by stating your name and.
Yes. My name is Deb Kuntz, and I'm with JS Held, and I'm the project manager for Hopewell, also representing the RDC as their project manager. So wanted to just thank the commission for considering this. You know, John Zodi is here as well, and he can speak eloquently about this. But, you know, this is an exciting time because this proposal is based in the master plan that was done several years ago for Hopewell. Thank you for approving Hopewell East, but now we're looking at Hopewell West, the next step, in preparation for what's happening, but in terms of the transfer of the property and the redevelopment. But maybe what's critical that I wanted to reinforce is that the timing of this, as was stated earlier, is really an opportunity to get the preservation of the historic core building maintained, but also developed into 38 affordable unit houses. And so that opportunity gives us an opportunity for the developer to submit for tax credits, and this primary plat is critical to get more points so that we can bring more tax dollars to the city of Bloomington. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Crossroads, but I wanted to mention that. Maybe one other last thing, because there are 2 existing buildings. If you haven't been by the site lately, go by. The Legacy Hospital is down. All we have left is what we want is the garage and the core building, and we will be working with the garage consultant to get the access into that garage fine-tuned as we go forward, but I'll let Crossroads develop and address the conditions.
Thank you, everybody. Gabriel, appreciate you kind of going through all that for us. I guess at this time, if there's any particular question, Andrew Wolf with Crossroad Engineers. Sorry about that. If there's any particular questions about the waivers that we're requesting, I can talk maybe a little more in detail if there's any specific questions about those. But at this time, I guess I'll just kind of open up for questions.
Great. If we're ready to move to questions, we can move to questions from the commission. Yeah. Go ahead.
So Gabriel, could you pull up the plat that shows the sidewalks along the...
Yes, just a moment.
Yeah.
This is the one you're looking for?
No, the one that shows
Oh, on Roger Street.
Yes, well,
This one?
nope.
Okay.
It was an earlier slide that showed it between lots, that showed sidewalks in between the lots, or through the
Probably,
lots.
pedestrian
This one here.
This one. Yes.
So, first off, I guess my concern is, well, first I'll ask a few questions. So this plat map, or if approved, will be a reference to the general public, will be a part of the code. Will they look to this and see, like, actually where the placement of those sidewalks are?
I believe, well, I'll say it and Jackie will correct me. The secondary plat will show the actual location of the proposed easements.
Okay, and the sidewalks that's proposed, are they 10-foot sidewalks?
As shown here, the width is not specified. I don't know.
It is 10
Andrew.
feet.
What was that?
The easement width is 10 feet.
10 feet, okay. And then off of those sidewalks, what kind of setbacks or buffer zones would someone who is building on that site have to come off that sidewalk?
So within an easement, the easement will specify what can be there or what cannot be there. And once you're out of the easement, you're out of the easement. So a normal pedestrian easement would require pedestrian access throughout the entire easement, but as 1 inch in from that, they could have a building wall. I mean, of course, they're approximately along property lines, so there would also be side setbacks that would come into play. But as far as the easement itself, once you're out of the easement, you're out of the easement.
Okay. I guess that's my concern. I just want to, where the placement of those, if there was any flexibility, if a developer or the general public wanted to move the sidewalks maybe to the other side, is there any flexibility in that, or would that be a variance?
Once the pedestrian easement is recorded, there would have to be something amending that to move it. But before it's recorded, whether that's on a plat or as a separate recording, it's up to the owner who's establishing the easement to move it how they want.
I mean, I think that the petitioner would have preferred that they're not static, that they could put them where they would like. Because of the guidance that was, the feedback that was received by the administration during the Phase 1 East process, the department recommended to the petitioner that they locate these because alleys are desired in this area, and in some of these locations where we're getting pedestrian easements, we're getting them because we are not getting alleys. And so in the spirit of trying to meet some of the needs that were raised at the time, and also just some of the benefits of having alleys, in set locations that make sense also physically on the ground to split the blocks up, we asked that they place the easements in actual locations this time as opposed to floating. One benefit, I mean, obviously it would be better for anyone developing here to get to decide where to put it. I think one benefit for the community is an expectation of knowing where they're going, as well as us as a department not getting into long, drawn-out discussions as these properties develop of, oh, I want to put my easement through my portico, doesn't that count? And where then to the public, those things don't read as public. We're here, they're set, and we know where they are before development occurs. So we did encourage them to do that, but in your line of thinking, yes, they also had originally asked if they could leave those off and through a purchase agreement, since we are the property owner, just require some sort of easement at the time of sale. But we prefer to do it this way. But if you all prefer to take that off, of course, that's your prerogative to do that.
The thought is to just remove any hurdles that, for a developer. that, so they could develop something of value there and not have those hurdles. I guess the question to the petitioner, are you okay with the placement of these sidewalks?
Yeah, we worked directly with staff on the placement of those. Some things to consider with more of a flexible location is there's obviously some really topographical challenges, site challenges that we have to contend with. So we need to be really sensitive to that when we think about placement of these. We've evaluated their placement as they currently stand, and to meet, ADA compliance and those sorts of things, we needed to pick an area that we could grade to those. As soon as you start moving some of those, you're changing your lengths and your slopes and can kind of complicate the site even more so than it already is. So I don't want to say that they can't be fluid, but there is some, I think, justification in addition to what she had previously mentioned too, kind of setting the expectation. That way we can set compliant sidewalks and crosswalks and cross slopes and all of that stuff for development.
Thought is if a developer took down a couple of lots and wanted to develop both sides of it, what kind of flexibility? So, no, thank you for your comments, and thank you, Gabriel. That's all I have.
Yeah, question.
Thanks for the presentation, both by staff and yourself. I just have a few questions. I don't require real long answers, but the parking garage, is that intended for public use, or do we know yet, or is it?
I'd be happy to answer that. Yeah, Deb Kuntz, JS Held, Project Manager for Hopewell. Yes, it is intended to be a public garage. However, we do expect also that several of the developers, they may want the opportunity to lease spaces as part of that housing. In fact, some of that is coming with the core building, but we intend for it to be a public garage.
Okay, thank you. And the greenway managed by Parks, how big are those? Roughly?
I don't have the specific acres in front of me.
I mean, when you said that, I think someone said park amenities, and I can't tell, I could guess, but
I don't think I have the specific acreage.
probably benches, I would guess, maybe something like that, but they don't look huge.
They are not huge, and
Yeah.
we can definitely look up the specific numbers. It's very similar to what you have seen on Phase 1 East, on the Hopewell East side of it as well. So, typically there is seating areas, places maybe for music. That is not big, expansive programmed areas, right? But there is a wetland garden, so an opportunity to see nature, right, and go experience that. But it's been working hand in hand with Parks on what that looks like and how that management would go. Currently on Phase 1 East or Hopewell East, and so we see this as being a parallel to that.
Good, great, it's good to see.
On the north side of University Street, they're 44.1 feet wide and extend the entire block. On the south side, they're kind of somewhat triangular shaped to add, according to the master plan, and sort of, add more feeling of space at that intersection. So they go from 15 feet to about 50 feet on either side. So we're talking, around 40 feet, 40 to 50 feet of width for those, and then extending the entire blocks.
Thank you. And just looking at, I am on 277 of the packet. Just when we look at this and we look at lots, say, 18 through 26 are small, and then, of course, lots 7 and 8 are quite big. 3, 4, 5, and 6 to the north are small. Just for the general public's understanding, because we are way down in the weeds, what would one intend to see, say, on lots 18 through 26? Houses, single family, I assume?
Yeah, the master plan identified a specific kind of layout of a housing development. Off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly what the configuration was, but it was homes along the south side. And the idea behind the multiple lots is it's easier if a developer were to come in and maybe have a little bit of a different vision. It's easier to combine and kind of alter versus add more down the road. So that's kind of the premise behind having a little bit more options than less.
Okay. And then 3, 4, 5, and 6 on 2nd Street are small and square? Is that also?
Same
Same
premise.
thing? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Last question about the fee. So how much would the fee be, and who would be paying it, and who are we saying doesn't have to pay it?
Starting with who would pay it, the petitioner would be Crossroad Engineer. They would pay it. However, they're being hired by the RDC, so ultimately it would be the city general fund that would be paying it to itself.
The city general fund would be paying it through Crossroads,
Yes.
and then Crossroads would pay it to the RDC?
Would be paying it to write a check that we...
I mean,
that
sorry,
we
it would be back to the city, sorry.
Would be
And how
back to the
much is
city.
that amount?
Let me see. We haven't actually calculated it yet, but we can calculate.
So I'll say in the past, and Mr. Ricker can correct me if I'm wrong, we have waived fees as your representative, but the technical language in the code says that the Plan Commission can waive those, so we wanted to bring that. I believe that's why it's being brought forward this time.
So it's $500 plus $50 a lot. There are a total of 34 lots, although with that one common area, maybe it's 33. But counting as 34, that would be $1,700 plus $500 for a total of $2,200.
That's it for me, thanks.
To my left. I have one question about the tree plots and what do we lose in that? I mean, I understand we lose the little feet, but is that not an issue for tree plots if they are reduced from 7 to 5?
Well, the way along University in particular, the idea is to also have the tree grates that you can walk around and things of that nature. So I think from a walkability standpoint, you're not really losing all that much because all the grates and stuff will be ADA compliant. You'll be able to cross over them and things. That from a walkability standpoint, you're not going to lose anything. The nature of the plantings, they've not been specifically nailed down at this point, but we'll be working with REA to identify site-specific plantings that are conducive to urban environments, so you don't have the root growth issues. We will most likely be designing more structural underground planters that force the roots to grow down into the ground versus out. A lot of those details haven't been fleshed out, but those are the goals of the project to alleviate some of those concerns of maybe losing a foot or two of width.
So it might just alter what goes in there.
Exactly.
Okay, great, good. Any other questions? And I'm sorry, I should ask Mr. Smith or Tron, our commissioners online. Anything?
Let's see, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I just, what was the impact of, on some of the waivers that talked about that we would need to acquire more right-of-way? Can, I don't know, Ms. Scanlon or whoever it's appropriate, speak about that just a little bit for that area? What impact does that have? Why is that, something that's prevented from making them wider? Just so I can understand and anyone out in the public can understand too.
I'm trying to understand, are you speaking about the pedestrian facility width and the tree plot width, or the Roger Street issue, or both?
Mostly the pedestrian width, thank you, yes.
And so the question is, what impact does that have?
Right, why can't we do it? I guess
Right, oh,
that's-
I see. Why can't we do it?
That's what I'm thinking. Why can't we just acquire that and make it consistent with the other 6 foot or 7 foot width?
Do you have a particular answer, Mr. Wolf, that you want to add in there based on the constraints of the site and how it's engineered?
Yeah, there's a few site challenges with the core building staying where it is. The alignments of the existing Fairview Street that we're trying to tie into at a 90-degree angle and directly across from, as well as the planned improvements along First Street have provided some site constraints horizontally. As far as specific widths, outside of the core building and the parking garage kind of area, to be honest, there's probably no it would kind of provide some unique intersections and kind of jogs to the pedestrian to get to kind of fit in through the site would be kind of really the only issue, to answer your question, if that makes any sense.
So do you mean to say that it just architecturally fits in better with the way that, it's designed now?
That's correct. Yes. You'll have more kind of awkward remnants, whether that's kind of right of way or developable. It'll kind of create some unique geometries for the parcels. So that's kind of what the challenge we're working with.
Okay, well, I appreciate you kind of trying to answer my question there. I assume that one will probably come up, at City Council. So you can be prepared for that question then too. But thank you very much.
All right, anything else from our virtual commissioners? Okay. All right, so anything else from our in-person group, and we can move to public comment otherwise. All right. Anyone from the public who would like to comment on the Hopewell project we've just discussed, if you have a question or comment, or if you're online and have a question or comment, please raise your hand and you'll be afforded 5 minutes, I think we're at here, for your comments. Anybody have anything? And if you could, when you approach the podium or get to speak on Zoom, if you could say your name, that would be great.
Good evening. My name is Dave Askins with the B Square Bulletin, and I have a question. There was one of the waivers involved the radii of the corners. They're required to be rounded, but they're proposed to be squared off. And, I'm a big fan of squares, actually, so I don't have anything against squares. I named my publication after that shape. It's a great shape. But the reason that was given was that the squared off shape is necessary to accommodate the goals of the development as guided by the Bloomington Hospital Site Redevelopment Master Plan. And I'm just hoping that some dots can be connected there, because that just left me wondering, gosh, how does a squared off corner really, how is that essential to the goals of the development? Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Comment on the Hopewell project.
Randy Cassidy. All my comments at this particular time are on a personal basis. I happen to be on the redevelopment commission, but we have our representative here in regards to that. The two things I'd just like to comment in regards to on this is a very important project. We're looking forward to try to make Hopewell an affordable, walkable place for our community as a whole. The two things as we go through this platting, which is a detailed situation, is on an issue of transparency and community effort. The aspect of asking for a waiver, while I appreciate that, and I know it's one entity to another, we should also take into consideration the aspect of what we ask all the other individuals in our community as they come to petition on this. And the aspect of a second waiver, the waiver, that's up to you guys, but there's a lot of questions and answers. And I don't know anything about squares and rounded. I just know there's a lot of things on here. We've got a lot of good things that are going. Just those are the two comments that I'd like to bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone on Zoom who would like to make a comment about this particular petition?
If you are on Zoom and would like to make a comment, you can raise your virtual hand or send a message to Jacqueline Scanlon host. I don't see anything.
Not seeing anything. Okay, so now we're back to commissioners' comments or additional questions. I suppose we could put forward the question that one of our public commenters, Dave Askins, raised about the radii. If an interesting question about how right angles actually better accommodate the goals of the project. If you could clarify, that would be great.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Because this area allows for a 0-foot setback, the radii on corners reduces the amount of developable property. It also kind of constrains the potential development of an urban building. So if you can visualize, if you can't build your building, say 25 feet from the corner because of the radius constraint, you're not going to put a curve in your building, or you can't really put a curve in your building. So to meet the goals of the ordinance or of the development, to have more of an urban infrastructure, more rectangular and square buildings, that's kind of why it's necessary to have more 90-degree angles at the lot corners, if that makes sense. We did check sight lines and turning radii, so all those criteria are met. It's more just how can the buildings be built within the site.
Thank you. Thanks. And I don't know if there's any other comments here. Anybody else have one? Yes, please go ahead.
So on the tree plot and the pedestrian, Commissioner Smith asked the question about the right-of-way, and they seem to both have the exact same language. And I just think if you would entertain me and explain it one more time, why you are asking to not have to have the amount of right-of-way that one would expect. And it seems to be the same for the pedestrian facility and the tree plot.
Yes, that is correct. It's essentially the same proposed finding for the two. So I don't know if the petitioners want to speak to it as well, but it comes down, one of the factors within it is the total right-of-way width and fitting in the different things that we want to see in that right-of-way within that right-of-way width. And the transportation plan classifies these interior streets as neighborhood residential streets, which have a 60-foot recommended width. So the required width of the right-of-way, according to the transportation plan and as required by the UDO, is 60 feet. And within that 60 feet, it would certainly be possible to have 8-foot sidewalks and 7-foot tree plots, and parking on both sides, and then you'd have room for maybe one car to travel down. So there's got to be, if you keep it within that 60-foot width, there's got to be some sort of trade-off there. And this is how the petitioner and the redevelopment commission and their consultants have felt that it is most advantageous to the development, including the city, to make that trade-off, to have that 60-foot width and have a sidewalk on both sides and have a tree plot on both sides and have wider sidewalks and wider tree plots where available, but have portions of them that are down to 6 feet for the sidewalk and down to 5 feet for the tree plot. So it ultimately just comes down to how do they plan to use that right-of-way space. The required right-of-way width is 60 feet along here. If they wanted to, they could certainly go over that. That would be allowed. That would reduce the developable area of the lots. That's a trade-off question that as the owner, the RDC can sort of play off of. But thinking about the city developing this as the city is putting on the hat of the developer, and so interested in getting the kind of development that the city wants, but maximizing the opportunities for that development. There's an incentive to not provide, to not give more right-of-way to itself, but not give more right-of-way than would really be necessary and a good design. So they're making that trade-off. So that's how the petitioner comes to what they're proposing, and then staff recommends that this is reasonable because of the proposed findings, that there are limits to how it can be used, and that it's not creating any adverse impacts.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful and clear. So last question, just back to the fees again. Is it money in and out, so the city is paying it and receiving it? That's what's happening?
I mean, that would be what,
Essentially?
I mean, officially, we would receive a check from Crossroads Engineer, I believe. And then, if they want to just eat that cost, I guess that would be up to them, but I believe their contract with RDC allows them to pass that through. So functionally, I believe it would come out of the city.
Actually, so for the RDC, they have a contract with Crossroads Engineer, and as part of that contract, there's a reimbursable expense for that fee. The Crossroads contract is funded by the TIF, and so the money would actually be paid ultimately through the TIF. It would be paid by Crossroads. Crossroads would reimburse it to RDC. That money would come out of the TIF, pay Crossroads. So essentially, it goes through two hands, but essentially it's the city paying the city.
So yeah, are you ready for comments? You
I
wanna do
suppose,
questions,
let's
go.
see if there are any other questions. Any other questions? But no, make a comment about that. Yeah.
I get that it's the back and forth, and so why do it? But it's the optics of it, and I don't think it's a real good look for us to waive the fee, because we don't waive it for anyone else, even though it's money in and out, and it would be annoying to have to deal with all the roundabout. I just think from a public perspective, we should apply the same rule. That's just my thought.
All right, any other comments about this proposal or aspects of it? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I wholeheartedly want a walkable neighborhood, so I really like incorporating the sidewalks. I just don't want to create any hurdles for a developer and helping this to be developed. I do really like the flexibility in lots and the variety of lots. I really think that's going to help develop that area and give a lot of different options to different people who want to invest in this area. So I will support adopting this, yeah.
Yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
I guess a few quick comments. One on the fees. I'm not familiar with all fees in city code and that the city collects, but I'm also, the ones that I am most familiar with, it is very common that the code explicitly doesn't require one department to pay another department. It just is kind of common in a lot of sense. So this feels very similar to that to me, but just open to the Planning Commission to vote on that. The waiver discussion about sidewalk widths and tree plot widths, I guess the way I understand it is right-of-way widths are set by the transportation plan. They can be exceeded. And when the TRO came in, it widened some of those widths, but didn't widen the minimum right-of-way dedication piece. And so that's a bit of that conflict. And so potentially alternatives do exist where extra right-of-way could be dedicated, or some elements of the cross-section could also be eliminated, like on-street parking. And so there's a lot of high-level discussion and trade-offs, and I think there's a big argument that on-street parking creates a more comfortable walking environment as well. So there's just some really good questions and debate in that topic. And then I guess one thing that I don't think we really heard or spoke much about was the discussion about the Rogers Street right-of-way width. I appreciated the staff presentation on that. And I think there is some merit to considering an additional condition that the petitioner work with the planning department to assure the necessary right-of-way is dedicated before the secondary plat is finalized to implement something like what we saw on that graphic. Only, yeah, just on Rogers Street for that.
Okay, thank you. In some ways, I feel like there's a question, Andrew, in your comment about the sidewalks and the trade-offs. And to me, it's a question of where is the right place for that to be debated? Is it here? Is it at the city council meeting? Is it, where would that be further debated or considered?
Now it's been brought up a couple times. This plat isn't going to city council. You're approving it or denying it, and that's happening here. But there is the condition of approval where they have to vacate the other rights of way, the old alleys from the turn of the century plat. So they will probably discuss some of these things, but you all are the decision makers about these waivers and whether or not you think they're appropriate. They will not technically weigh in on those items.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I think this is, I realize we're really in the weeds here, talking about radii and, real specific foot level requirements, but that is the nature of our business here. Any other comments or questions about this?
Comment or question. I appreciate Commissioner Seabor's reflection on the fee. I just wanted to clarify. So Crossroads Engineering is a for-profit entity? Yes, it is. Okay, so for me, I guess it doesn't feel like city departments, which I totally agree with. This just feels different, and it may just be accounting, but it feels like it's a necessary flow that needs to occur out of deference and fairness to all the other people we ask in the community to do that. So, but I do appreciate that perspective, so thank you.
Yeah, the only other question for me on that same item on the agenda is if that fee has any substantive implication for any other proposals that are going through with regard to any sort of core administration building funding or anything like that. If I would hate to do something if it would have a deleterious effect on something else moving forward. But if not, I share Commissioner St. John's concern about the optics of this.
Answer your specific question, it does not impact what happens with the core building specifically in terms of the fee, the waiver of the fee that you're speaking to.
Yeah, I just don't want to hold up. I don't want to hold up any additional funding source or anything like that. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Generally speaking, we try to avoid situations where we are invoicing ourselves and then paying ourselves money. And that's why we sort of have these provisions that waive fees in circumstances like this.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so we have an optic perception issue and then a procedural issue here.
So are you actually invoicing, aren't you invoicing Crossroads?
The ultimate source of the money will be the city, and so that's why it's generally we try to avoid things like that.
No, I understand, but the actual invoice is made out to Crossroads, and Crossroads pays it, whether or not they ask for reimbursement in their bills that they send in, they still get the invoice, right?
I'm not sure how the mechanics of that would work accounting-wise. I know that the ultimate source of the funds, of course, would be municipal funds.
Yeah, the in and out, yeah. So I guess that was my point. The optics of not billing a for-profit who is being paid to not pay a fee, they can pass it on to the city, but I understand, yeah, thank you.
I'll just clarify in this case, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but based on what the petitioner said, the money will come from the TIF, so the money comes from tax money, and then it's going to go into the general fund. All the money, anyone who does a petition or a permit with us and pays us any money doesn't come to the department at all. No matter how many we get, we don't get to have new people or anything, it just all goes into the general fund and then is used by the administration how they see fit. So it's not even like someone gave the example of taking money from a different department, which is all kind of under the administration's budget. It's actually, it sounds like coming from TIF money, from tax money, and then coming into the general fund in this case, if that means anything to anyone. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Any other questions?
I do have my hand raised. I've been waiting patiently. Thanks, Jackie. I was actually going to make that same comment that it's coming from the redevelopment fund and going most likely to general. So, I do think TIF money is a dedicated type of use. So there's that to consider. Didn't really want to weigh into that discussion. I was just kind of really curious about where the funds were coming, and I figured they were coming out of the TIF. So I'm glad that that's been clarified. My question is actually to Mr. Seaboard's kind of point, Andrew, you said there could potentially be another condition, but if you were going to maybe consider one, what would that be? I'm kind of curious if you wanted to expand on that anymore, because if you had thought out of another potential condition for that dedication and right of way, I'd be very curious to hear that.
Staff, because I know it was briefly touched on in the staff report, like an additional 8 feet, I think was referenced from University to 2nd Street along Rogers be dedicated. Is that, am I nailing that? Okay.
There's a possible language that's there in the staff report. It's not in the recommended conditions because the recommendation was to have a discussion about it, but let's see what page it was on. There is some language on the top of page 266 of the packet. It's page 10 of the staff report within the packet. I'll just read it here. The secondary plat shall provide 8 additional feet of right-of-way dedication along South Rogers Street between West 2nd Street and West University Street to bring the total right-of-way dedication in this segment to 50 feet from the established apparent center line of the roadway. So that's one possible language that could be used for such a condition.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are now at a point of needing a motion here, if we can craft one. It seems like we have at least 2 issues on the table as some modification. Does anyone want to make a proposal for? Yeah, thank you. If we can see the conditions. The proposal and then, or the recommendation and then the conditions. And this one includes the 4th condition. And then the possibility of what we just discussed was the secondary plat shall provide 8 additional feet of right-of-way dedication is an idea here that's part of this, perhaps adding another condition. All right, I know this is difficult because now we have multiple things to look at here. So keep that one up there, Gabriel, but not all of us have the 4th condition. Oh, well, we don't all have the 4th condition in our packets because that was
Correct.
added
It's not in
late.
the packet, it's only in the presentation.
Yeah.
And we can jump to that as well if you'd like to see that. Actually, with your permission, I think I'll put this language into the presentation on the same screen as the 4th one so that we can see them both together.
That would be great. Thank you. Yeah, so we can consider that. And the other item we've been discussing is about a waiver of an application fee, but that's not a condition. That's within a recommendation or a motion. So that could be removed if anyone felt that that was worth voting on. So let's have a look at what we have here as possibilities. Okay, so the first is the identical part that's already in our packet, and the new pieces are number 4 and 5. Thank you. All right, are there anybody in the commission that wants to make a motion here?
guess I'll go for it. I think the first slide here says that I propose that we adopt the proposed findings. I'll propose we waive the application fee, we waive the second hearing, and approve the primary plat of DP-23-23 with all associated waivers and with the 3 conditions that were in the staff report and the 2 that have since been added in the presentation. Condition 4 that discusses reducing the number of lots to address the length to width ratio, and then an additional condition regarding a dedication of additional right-of-way along Rogers Street as the 5th condition.
I just want to do a last check with staff to make sure that number 5 that looks okay?
Yeah,
Statement-wise?
just want to highlight that previously, Mr. Seabour had mentioned the possibility of having language saying something about shall discuss with planning and transportation staff. You could do something like that. This is more clear cut, that there has to be 8 feet. So that's up to your discretion.
All right, Commissioner Seabour, what do you think? Should it deserve the work with city planning staff, or is this clear about what we're seeking in this?
I guess I defer to the group. I think I trust the petitioner to work with planning and transportation staff to make sure adequate right-of-way is preserved. So I like maybe the more general, but if everybody's more comfortable with this, that's still better than without it.
I'm comfortable with the more specific because we're not losing anything from this.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second that.
All right. Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the proposal. I'll try and read it just one more time. That the proposal is to adopt, or the motion is to adopt the proposed findings, waive the application fee, waive the second hearing, and approve the primary plat of DP 2323, plat 2023-06-005 with all associated waivers and with the 5 conditions now specified. All right, so that's what we're voting on.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if we vote no, like I might because of the fee, I can come back and make a second motion for everything except the fee.
That would be a possibility.
It's a possibility. Okay.
That's correct, and I would just remind the Plan Commission, I believe 7 voting members are present tonight. The Plan Commission's rules require 5 affirmative votes for any motion to pass in all cases.
Okay. All right, so with that, we need 5 votes to pass this, but let's proceed with the roll call vote.
Okay, great. Smith?
I think that was a yes, but
Oh,
could
sorry,
you?
can you repeat yourself, Ron? Sorry.
Yes, that's okay, so sorry.
Thank you. No, you're fine. St. John?
I'm going to vote no.
Ballard?
Yes.
Burrell?
No.
Seabour?
Yes.
Cockrum?
Yes.
Kinsey?
No.
Motion fails 4-3.
Okay. So now.
So I'd like to make a motion that is the exact same motion that was just made, except the waiver of the application fee is struck from that motion, because I do wholly support this project.
Okay, so we have a slightly revised new motion that removes the waiver of the application fee, but is otherwise exactly the same as what we just indicated. And could we do a vote on this?
Is
now?
that good enough,
I think
Mr.
you need a
Wicker?
second.
Oh, second, sorry. I will second this one.
I think that is sufficient definiteness for the vote to proceed. So I think
you.
that's correct. We have an identical motion to the last motion, except the waiver of fees has been withdrawn.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Ballard,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Seabor,
Yes.
Cockrum,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
7-0, thank you.
All right, so this passes 7-0. Thank you for all of everyone's work on this. I know it was a lot of detail. Phew, we're all supportive of Hopewell. We want this process or the project to continue, so thank you, everybody. Okay, that was a long one, folks, longer than, yeah.
So sorry that was longer than I indicated.
Okay, all right, no apologies. This is good work. Okay, so now we actually,
Or do you want to take a break now before? You just typically take a break
yeah,
between
why don't
7
we
and
do a
8
quick
if we're
little
going to go
stand
late.
up? We probably should all stretch and stand up at least.
Just 5
Okay,
minutes,
just
maybe.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
5 minutes, folks?
So back
Thank
at
you.
7:13, thank you.
probably need to be in the room. All right, okay, thank you. Yeah. All right. All right. Thank you all for sticking around and for continuing with us. We'll get started on the second item on our agenda, petition PUD 1823 Sudbury Development Partners LLC, South Weimer Road, or is it Weimer or Weimer? I never get this right. We'll address this property, a request to rezone approximately 140 acres to planned unit development and a request for approval of a district ordinance and preliminary plan. This is not the only time we'll be talking about this proposal. We'll hear this at least 2 times. Is that the at least 2 times?
I think, well, we'll see based on how you're feeling about it tonight, but this is going to be so high level and very broad that I think it'll probably end up being 3 times, and that this month will be broad, big questions, and then next month they can come back with some refinement to kind of close out some things, maybe like uses and areas and things like that, and then we would come back again in September. Because as you'll see when I'm talking about it, some of the things like phasing, they won't be able to be answered anytime soon because we need information from CBU and things like that. So they'll be here in September either way. So I think it's probably gonna be valuable for us all to just mentally plan to come back in August as well.
So I think this is important for our audience here in the room and perhaps online to note, is that tonight is not the only occasion to talk about this. Now, I don't know if that's good news or bad news, but tonight is not our only chance. So again, as Ms. Scallon indicated, we will start with some really high-level conversations, so we may as well just kick off.
All right, here we go.
Ready to get started?
Thank you, everybody, for being here. We are looking at a petition from Sudbury Partners LLC. It is PUD 1823. The general location is obviously off of South Weimer. The property is located east of Weimer, south of the terminus of South Adams, north of the Summit Woods development, and east of RCA Park and the Monroe County government-owned property that's been discussed for a potential jail. The property is currently largely zoned PUD. You can see there's a little bit of small yellow here, which I'm guessing is probably a mapping issue long before we did maps on computers, and has stuck through. But the property is surrounded in this kind of maroon thicker color line, and that is the property that is being rezoned. And you can see here to the north Arbor Ridge, part of the original PUD that was approved in 1999. And then, as I mentioned before, Summit Woods to the south with the Adams Street extension here, and then Adams here to the north as well. So these properties that are kind of grayed out are in the county. They are not in the city jurisdiction. And they are, again, at Arbor Ridge, paired homes, and then west of Weimer, single family. Just want to make sure we're not missing anything here. Okay, and then down here as well, we have Breaking A Way, which is a road stub here, and a city path that also stubs to the property. So the site is just under 139 acres. Again, as I mentioned, it's the remaining portion of the partially developed 1999 Sudbury PUD. The petitioner is requesting a map amendment, which is what we commonly refer to as a rezone of the property to a new PUD. So that includes the processes of a new district ordinance, which is the new rules for the area, and a new preliminary plan, which is how they plan to use the property. And if you're not familiar, this is in the southwest portion of the city. So again, roughly 139 acres, currently mostly zoned PUD. The comprehensive plan designation is neighborhood residential, and I neglected to indicate in the report, and will correct for next month, that this is also part of a focus area. So we can talk a little bit more about that when we get to the comprehensive plan section. But meaning that neighborhood residential does, in most places on the larger future land use map, describe areas that are already developed, and then has some particular plans for these larger areas that are undeveloped, and then they're more specifically discussed in the focus area. And this property is undeveloped. Okay, so again, let's start with kind of a high-level petition overview like we did in the staff report. They are requesting a map amendment and district ordinance and preliminary plan. They're proposing a new PUD with 5 what we are calling neighborhoods, and they've named them, so you can see those 5 here. New rights-of-way, so some that appear in the transportation plan, which are required to be built, and then, of course, other small local roads to connect the developments within this development and to the surrounding areas. They are proposing in the 5 areas anywhere from 4,450 to 6,000 new units. That's dwelling units. And if you look through their proposed district ordinance, that is dwelling units of different scales, so from single family through multifamily, and then some of what we have called in the past, largely referred to as missing middle, so some plexes as well, small townhouses, attached paired homes, and small apartments. They have indicated that they're planning across the board for this area, as well as some senior and assisted living. The development proposal, something we'll hopefully hear clarified from the petitioner in the different documents that we have, should be, they plan for the property to be developed over the next 8 to 9 years. They are planning to leave land for a trailhead for the Duke Energy easement project that the city of Bloomington is doing. So you can see these lines here. This is the Duke power line easement, and a trailhead is desired in this general location, as well as land for a fire station. So they're working with those departments to dedicate that land as needed through this project. And of course, if you're familiar with this parcel or the previous PUD, there are a lot of environmental issues here, and so planning for that environmental protection as well. So this is, let's see, can I zoom in on this? New Adobe is not something I'm familiar with, not into it. Hold on, just a sec. So this was in the packet as well, but this is their proposed roadway plan with some connections to the outside roads for scale. So in the transportation plan, there are 3 roads on this property, and I'll show those later. One is the extension of Sudbury. So Sudbury goes to roughly this location, if you can see my cursor here, and they would be extending that as a general urban typology to the east. And in the transportation plan, that road continues to the east toward Rogers. And so a future connection to Strong, as the properties to the east develop, could provide another vehicular connection to the area. Additionally, Adams stubs to the property from the north. It is in the county, and we believe it is privately maintained. But the transportation plan shows a connection there, so they are planning to do that connection as well. And connecting to the Adams to the south, which again is in the Summit Woods development. There is still a portion that is not developed, and we are expecting that portion to be developed as the last, I believe, 4 or 5 homes in Summit Woods are built. So that would be a future connection there. And then they are showing a potential future connection to Christopher Lane here to the north, which isn't a large connection at this time. A connection here on the southern end, this green line, as I mentioned, breaking away down here previously, a connection there, as well as a trail connection to the trail that runs alongside of that road. And then, again, we'll look at the transportation plan here shortly, but they are proposing this potential future connection. They obviously don't own this portion, but would stub to the end of their property for a potential vehicular connection to Wapahani at some time in the future. Okay, so the petitioner has provided this preliminary building layout. Again, I'm sure that they will speak to this in more detail than I have, but my understanding is that the building sizes don't necessarily denote a design at this point. Each building design indicates a number of units that they would be proposing to build in that location, not necessarily to the shapes and sizes shown here, but obviously in some way related to them, and that's why they are the shapes that they are. So indicating, development here in the center area is larger, and then smaller as you move toward the edges of the PUD. We have a number of comments on this that I'll get into here shortly, but their idea is to have this green space here open in the middle along the southern side of Sudbury, and then obviously leaving the existing waterway here open with some crossings of it, but not having development near it, and then the waterway and floodplain on the west side along Weimer to be undeveloped as well. So I'll briefly go over each, again, what I'm calling neighborhoods. We're still kind of working on that nomenclature. The first is called Shasta Meadow. It's this one here on the west side. It's almost 26 acres, and the two zoning districts that they have picked for that area are RH1 and RH2. So for those who aren't familiar, in a plan unit development, it is recommended that you choose base zoning districts that are already in the code. So RH and MN are existing zoning districts in our code. And, one is residential high-density multifamily, and the other is mixed-use neighborhood scale. And then you can propose alternatives to some standards in those districts to meet the goals of your plan unit development. So in this case, they've chosen those two, and they've split the high density into two scales. So in this particular corner, they're choosing to focus on the two residential areas that they have, districts that they have chosen to include. So if you read about them, look at the use table, you'll see that they are planning some residential across the scale, as I mentioned before, from single-family detached to multifamily, senior and assisted living. 3 to 4 stories would be the expectation here, with potentially some limited commercial on the east end near the Everest Center, which is the brown in the middle, and that there are environmental protections to be concerned about and to build around on the west side of the property. And delivery here would be expected to be 2025 to 2026. So this is the first district that they would be expecting to be able to develop. So again, planning to do RH2 here on the outside and RH1 on the inside. I'm showing you all these things because they're in the current plan. I do think this will change. We have given some feedback about this being kind of confusing, that there may be too many of these small districts, like how here there's A1, AB, and AC, because in the use table, they each have their own sets of uses. So that amounts to 15 separate sets. And so I do believe the petitioner is working on making that clearer or having it be a little bit less varied, but just wanting to present to you what we have thus far and get your comments on that as well. And then these are the street connections that they're showing, again, for this same section. So the red is Sudbury, already built to here, and then the roadway connections. So some of the comments that we have had here that we haven't gotten a lot of response yet about is why can't these be more traditionally gridded, east, west, north, south, since there's already going to be a large east, west, and north, south road here. We understand that there are some environmental considerations to the west. Can they be mitigated? Can you build over an extra connection to Weimer? Those are some of the questions we've asked for this area. So the second area is on the southern end. It's called Denali Woods. It's almost 33 acres. Again, the two mainly residential districts are included. So here they're planning 3 to 5 stories. And again, the fire station and trailhead in this location, I think it's noted on a separate map. We believe that there's some tree protection that probably needs to happen here in the southern portion based on some site visits done by staff. So we're still working with the petitioner on that. So when you see the development pattern that they have planned, it may end up being smaller than what they have originally started with. This is the other area they think they could start developing immediately. So delivery on this portion is also 2025 to 2026. And obviously built around this connection to Adams to the south. So again, including those two residential districts, and then the area shown for the fire station and trailhead would be here on the east side of New Adams, and then there would be some other small local road network here with the connection to Breaking Away, which already exists to the south. Area 3 is just over 31 acres, and this is where we see our first inclusion of mixed-use neighborhood scale. So that's going to be primarily mixed-use / commercial focus. So here in the description, they call high-density mixed use. Again, they have a varied list of residential, including the senior assisted living and some limited commercial. These buildings are meant to be 3 to 6 stories. Again, we have identified some tree preservation in the southern portion that may need to occur, so we're still working with the petitioners on that. And delivery of this area is indicated to be near the end between 2028 and 2029. So we'll talk about this more in a bit, but the department is feeling that this much mixed-use neighborhood scale is probably inappropriate for this area because we think they're going to lose a number of, they're going to lose some of this here to the south because of tree preservation, and that if they're trying to create a node in the center with Section 5, which we'll get to, we're not convinced, haven't been convinced yet that that needs to expand out all the way to the eastern border. So that's something we're working on with the petitioner. Again, here are more of the traditional street grid, which the comprehensive plan does call for. A question we've posed to the petitioner based on some comments that were made by one of their professionals in a meeting about the scale of this waterway here, that it's maybe not quite as big as you might think it would be based on kind of some of the discussion and images, is that can we have more vehicular or pedestrian connections across? Does this section need to be so split from the rest of the development? So something to think about there. Neighborhood 4 is called Whitney Glen. It's much smaller, 12.3 acres, again focusing on the residential uses, varied residential with some limited commercial near Sudbury, 3 to 5 stories, and delivery at the end of the project from 2028 to 2030. So again, the 2 residential districts there and the roadway connection here. So could this be, why are these offset? You know, we're trying to look into the future and, you know, use some sort of well understood and proven roadway design for connection, one of which is gridded and it's called for in the comprehensive plan. So working with them on that. And then this is the large area in the middle. It's called Everest Center. It's almost 35.5 acres, and the focus here is MN. So this would be the most intense area. Varied residential listed in the use table and description, also varied commercial uses. The open space I mentioned earlier in the middle with some green space, parking facilities, which we'll discuss under uses a little bit more, that they would like to add to their allowance that aren't allowed in other places in the city. And 5 to 8 stories is what they're indicating here, with delivery from 2026 to 2028. So again, this entire area is shown as MN. We'll discuss this a bit later, but one of our concerns is the interface here between the new development and the existing development of Arbor Ridge directly across Sudbury. So having the discussions about the intensity of this development immediately adjacent to the paired homes across the street. So here, fairly gridded, which is great. But again, this is kind of off kilter a little bit. It's not actually east-west. You can tell that because here is Adams. So again, why an actual grid can't be put in place here. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that this was in the comprehensive plan as neighborhood residential, and you can see that here. You can also see by this green dashed line that this is also considered a focus area, which was something that I neglected to put in the staff report. So let me see if I can briefly, I think I called that up. It's called the West Fork Clear Creek focus area. Again, it's identified largely because it's undeveloped, one of the larger undeveloped areas in the city, you know, planning for developing in this area to be more kind of complex and maybe simpler than some of the other neighborhood residential, or not as simple, excuse me, as some of the other neighborhood residential development, which is largely infill or small scale. So that's something we'll want to look to as we move through these meetings as well. I think, I'm trying to find my shared screen. Here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to generally go over these issues and concerns. They were mostly in the packet, and then answer any questions that you all may have. So the first is our general PUD organization. We spoke about this in the written report as well, but Plan unit developments are great. They are great because they offer the opportunity for unique and innovative development and the opportunity for the city to maybe get new and exciting types of development that can't be achieved through the regular zoning code. In this instance, this piece is so large that it does make sense for it to be a plan unit development. We just want to make sure that in 8 years, when staff is administering this plan unit development, and we have as many plan commissioners who will still be here and those of you who won't, that they'll be able to understand what's going on here. So in a typical plan unit development, developer will identify those things that they want to be different. And so they say, for example, that they want to use the MN zoning district except for, and then you list 6 things that you want to do differently. So the petitioner has done that a bit. What they have done is take kind of whole cloth sections from the UDO and then make small changes in it. So from a staff perspective, even just reviewing it for this meeting, I'm reading it against the UDO to make sure that I'm not missing something that we don't normally talk about or, hasn't come up a lot lately that's not on the tip of my brain. And so every time someone has to do a review here, that's what they're going to have to do, which is fine, except that a lot of what they've included isn't different because they're hoping to freeze some of the UDO in time. So it's really 3 tiers in my mind. It's the things that are different. It's the things they want to keep the same. But the problem is that the UDO also says if there are items that are not specifically called out in the PUD, then staff has to revert to the UDO to see what the rule is. And that's fine, we do that all the time. But what that typically looks like is in a PUD where they're saying we're using MN except for these 6 things, then you're getting those 6 things here and you're getting everything else from the UDO, and that's fine. In this case, because they've included so much that they were hoping to kind of freeze in time, we are still working with them on, we're open to them proposing that. We don't actually know that you all or council would approve that, because the idea is if council sees fit to change regulations in the next 10 years for landscaping or parking or something like that, do they really want this 140 acres to be exempt from that? Because the petitioner wants to be able to, themselves as a developer and as selling this property to someone else, to be able to say these are definitely the regulations no matter what. I'm not sure that that's going to happen, but we've told them they can propose that, but we would prefer that it be really narrowed. If there are 12 things in the landscaping chapter that you are just married to, just call them out and say we're keeping these 12 and then everything else, and then we're changing these 6 and then everything else comes from the code. Because even in doing this review, we found a couple of examples where it's like a list of items that all need to be checked and they aren't all particularly intertwined. And so if they've only included 4, are they under the impression that the other 3 don't apply, or that now I'm going back to the code to read those because the 4 they did include, they didn't change anything in them? And so we are still working with them to have that be, it needs to be clearer than it is. So when you read through it, which I'm sure you did, that may have felt confusing or kind of overwhelming. It's a lot of information and a lot of it is repeat. So kind of trying to pare that down as we move forward, and I think they're already working on that. But here's the example I mentioned earlier. These are the 15 use sections. If you cut these up and map them out by similarities, there really are less, where there are just 1 or 2 things that are different. And so I think they're working on bringing those down to be more similar to the dimensional standards, which are done just for the 3 districts of MN, RH1, and RH2. So again, we're working with them on that. That's kind of a big deal to us. It might not be as big of a deal to you as far as content, but as far as moving forward and clarity for expectations for all of the decision makers in the future, we would like that to be clearer. So that's a big one for us. The second thing is environmental protection. They have in a number of places, and I won't go into super detail about this, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have detailed questions, have proposed slightly reduced standards for environmental protection. So for example, in the riparian buffer district in our code, each zone is 25 feet for a total of 75. We proposed to you all in the council a number of years ago to start that measurement from the middle of the stream as opposed to the bank, because we don't have very many wide banks, so we're not losing much ground there. So it's already slightly reduced than some in the community would like, and they're proposing to reduce Zone 3. So we have said, why? How is that helping the community goals? So there are a couple of those in the environmental section. But as you can see, and I said before, this area really is pretty environmentally constrained. So for example, they're proposing a different percentage for how much of the area over 18% you could disturb. Again, who is that helping besides the developer? And we do want to help see this developed. We are, glad to see this being done, but we need to balance the community goals as well. This one's kind of fuzzy. This is from their report for karst location, and then tree preservation area. Again, as I mentioned, there's some trees obviously here that they've indicated, and some trees here on the south end as well. So working with them to prioritize those. So I was able to pop out there today and walk around the fringes and there's all those public rights of way that abut it, which is great. And you can see this is from I believe this is from the southwest pin of the property facing northeast. So you can see large clumps of trees exist all over the property. This is facing north, so this is adjacent to Weimer, so facing north on Weimer. And you can kind of tell in these pictures how low this area gets here, because this shrubbery and stuff is down so far, and this is the top of it. So lots of green here already, and just wanting to make sure that we're doing our best to figure out how to preserve those environmental things that are still there. So number 3 is right-of-way connections. As I mentioned before, having a serious discussion about whether or not another connection to Weimer could be done through the floodplain here, and whether or not that needs to be considered. Sudbury isn't a new connection. That already exists. Some people live off of that road now. They will be doing the Adams Street connection to the north and south. As I mentioned, Adams doesn't actually go through to the south yet. We anticipate that to happen in the next few years, but you just never know. So starting development with only 2 exits of this number of units, because Wapahani, again, this connection they're proposing here would have to go through someone else's development. 3 connections, because they'd be doing breaking away. Just something to consider for you all, and to maybe, that's something, that they will do a traffic study, and that may happen before it gets out of here. It'll be something for you all to think about. It will definitely happen before it goes to council, and something that may have an effect on, or something that will be part of that discussion, is number of exits and the effect on the surroundings, of course. So no new connection on Weimer. North and south to Adams are planned to be connected, as I said. Sudbury will go all the way to the east, and then breaking away to the south. So the kind of weird blue outline is the parcels in question, and then the lines underneath are from the transportation plan. So when you go to do a subdivision, you're required to plat and build those roads on your property that are in the transportation plan. So they will plat and build. This is Sudbury, and this is Adams, and they have agreed to build it on their parcel here, as you've seen in the other drawings. This connection on the south end is the one we're still talking to them about. They would like to do a stub, as I mentioned, not exactly where it shows in the transportation plan, because connecting to Weimer may not make a lot of sense. It will probably change potentially in the course of the development of this property. Wapahani is out here to the west, so maybe with the idea of having it go directly west sometime in the future. That's something that we are still discussing. So again, the other option could be just bringing it straight out to Weimer north of the trail. So again, areas of concern for right-of-way connections: why isn't it traditionally gridded, and why no additional access on Weimer? So I put in some images here so you can see the roads that are built around this are clearly built to connect this at some point. Not all of them, but most of them. So this is Adams on the north end of the development site, facing north. So this is, obviously a very well-developed road, mature trees. It has sidewalks on both sides. They would be connecting to this, which would be great for a great connection through the city. Let's see. This is Sudbury, not a small road. Obviously, you can see it's quite big, and it is general urban in our transportation plan, so the rest of the connection that they make would also be large as well. Again, this road's been here for a while, large developed trees, sidewalks on both sides. And then you can see this is the entrance to Arbor Ridge, which is right before the end of the existing Sudbury Road. It ends right there. This is the breaking away stub that was built in the last couple of years, I believe also by the Ridge Group, and then the end of the trail as well. So this is facing north on the southern side of the development, the proposed development. And then this is Adams Street. From the pictures I was showing, this is facing south, so onto the property. This is Adams on the Summit Woods side, facing north. So it does end. As I said, there's a portion that needs to still be built, currently blocked off. Someone left a scooter there, which is kind of weird. And then this is Weimer, 2-lane road here, facing south near the development site. This is further south of the development on Weimer. This is a 1-lane bridge. You cannot pass it with 2 cars. And so something to be considered. So when they do their traffic study, I'm showing you these things because these are the kinds of things that they'll consider and have to think about. What is their development going to do? What's the effect it going to have on all of these things? And how much are we as a city going to say, you know, you will be impacting this, we need you to fix it, basically. That's a discussion we'll have to have at that time. Number 4 is incentives. So this was described in the report a little bit, but there are some kind of confusing, and again, it's a gigantic document, and we've been working with them for months, so back and forth, and so some things I think can be easily clarified, but I just wasn't sure what they were when I was doing this report, so I wanted to be clear about what those are. When we use incentives for regular development in the city, for typical non-PUD development, you can use incentives to have increased height, reduced dimensional standards, potentially larger, like the bulk of your building, and you have to dedicate 15% of your units toward permanent, affordable, or workforce housing. When you are applying to do a PUD, that's just a general standard for PUD, 15% affordable or workforce housing. You can't do a PUD in Bloomington anymore unless you're meeting that standard with your units. So I think one thing that needs to be clarified in discussions that we need to have, because they would still like to include incentives, they would like to alter them. For example, in the UDO, for sustainable incentives, you have to meet all of these particular requirements. I believe there are 6. Or you can get like a certification, like a LEED standard certification. Those are your options. They would like to reduce it to 3, meeting 3 of the standards. You may recall that we used to allow 4, and then we changed it to all 6 because 4 was just too simple. And so a number of the developments that we saw using incentives weren't doing any affordable housing, and were just doing sustainability because it wasn't complicated to meet. So that's kind of one piece. The other piece is, and we can hear from them tonight, I feel like it's unclear whether or not the 15% that's required for their PUD is doubling as the 15% for their incentives, or whether or not we're going to get some percentage more than the 15% required for the buildings being taller. And maybe it's appropriate for those things to be paired, but their base heights are so much bigger than our base heights. They're, like in the MN, for example, the regular max height in MN is a number 3 or so stories lower than, it's 3, sorry. The height max in MN is 3 stories, up to 40-something feet. If you wanted to do our full incentive package under the UDO in a regular MN district, the most you could get is 5.5 stories. In some of their base areas that they're indicating they'd like, they're already at 7, 8 stories before incentives. So then to allow them to use incentives to get an additional 2.5 stories and no additional affordable housing, to me, I I'm either not understanding it or that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So we'll hear from them tonight. But, to get a 10-story building and not give an additional percentage of units when our typical code would only allow you a building half that size with that same percentage feels odd. But, the numbers may work out in such a way that they can explain that that makes sense. And we just haven't had that detailed conversation yet. So something that we'll need to think about is how to make sure that we're properly phasing those incentives. They're saying 15% per area. Do we do caps on areas? We want to make sure that we are thinking about the triggers and the phasing not only as areas, but as temporally as well. With the original Sudbury PUD, all of the triggers for public incentives were development-based, so they hit those thresholds and then they just stopped building, and then they didn't build the public improvements. So we want to try to avoid that here. And then one more thing for the incentives, I believe, is the idea of including beds in facilities such as nursing homes or assisted livings toward a unit count. So saying if you had 10 beds where the recipients were on Medicaid, can that count as 10 units toward your minimum for that area? So that would be different for us, so that's something for you all to consider as well. Okay, and so then this, I'm almost done, I swear. And then this, I touched on location of areas briefly before, where we said in this area on the east side, is there some concern about having mixed-use neighborhood here? The circle and the yellow on the east side and the circle on the bottom, those seem like tree preservation areas from our analysis. So, are we getting rid of both of those? What's the plan there? And just, generally a large amount of MN, and should that be kind of more focused in order to create kind of a node of interest for this neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods that will use this area. So I wanted to include this here. This is from just inside the stub of Sudbury, facing north. So these are the roofs of the paired homes immediately north. So Sudbury, again, quite a large right-of-way. There will be some separation there. Always plan to connect. It's not like, that was always part of the original plan before Arbor Ridge was ever built. But I do think it's something to consider if we're talking about 8-story buildings on the south side of Sudbury, which is what is included in the current plan. And then those buildings can have incentives and be even taller. Should there potentially be some sort of smaller threshold here of smaller buildings? And is there a way to kind of push people through to this being a commercial area? As opposed to having it just be on one side of Sudbury. So those types of questions. And again, I wanted to include this one from the same location where you can see those tree stands and how thick they are along the eastern portion. Okay, so my last one is phasing, which I mentioned. They did in their report propose some phasing. We are still discussing that. Phasing is really difficult to discuss at this stage because a lot of it depends on how they can attach the utilities, and we won't know that until the end of August. So we wanted to come here to start the conversation with you, start the conversation with the public of what the issues and questions are. We'll likely come back again next month with some more details about whatever those may be, but then in September have a more, a complete package, hopefully, of saying this is what we're planning to do with the phasing, this is where all the districts are going to be, this is have it be done by then. That's the idea. And of course, if you need more time, then you'll take more time. So that is for your review. We haven't, I don't think, really kind of signed off on that. We're trying to figure out, as I mentioned before, a way for, Adams and Sudbury have to be billed up front. So they're part of the transportation plan. When they plat it, a clock starts, and they have to build it within a certain number of years. Those areas don't necessarily serve the areas that they want to develop first, but that's, their choice to develop it that way. So we want to make sure that we get those improvements if we're adding people into this area. And so that's something that we are trying to figure out how to make that happen. So again, this is some of their submitted information related to the utilities and some of our goals, making sure that we're achieving those community benefits, especially related to safe vehicular and pedestrian connection, and having to wait on these utility connection answers from CBU is a big deal at this point. So we are excited to see this PUD developed. We have seen the Ridge Group do a project here in town that went well. They worked with the city on the trail that I showed earlier that's south of this development. It is such a large and impactful development that we just want to make sure that we are digging down as deep as we need to get as many answers and plans up front so that everyone who is interested can know what they're expecting here. And that we can make sure that we are focusing on what is not only good for the developer, but also good for the community. So we're recommending to you that you forward the petition to the required second hearing, which we think will likely be in August. And you could, I think, Mr. Ricker can correct me if I'm wrong, but you could continue to August, and then if we had to amend that agenda, we still could. Okay, and I can answer any questions, thanks.
Let's hear from the petitioner, someone from Sudbury Development here. If you, again, you could state your name, that'd be great.
Good evening. Angela Parker here from Carmen Parker for the petitioner. We're pleased to be here. We really are. We appreciate Jackie's report because that was not an easy one. We're also pleased to have so many other people here. So, because the goal tonight is to really get some feedback and push the pause button. We've been working on this for months and months and months, having the high-level review here is really important to us in terms of the process and incorporating a lot of that feedback. So we appreciate those of you who have been sitting here for quite a long time tonight, and also those who have zoomed in with us, so thank you. Oh, okay, great. So we've got a handout. I'm going to give it to you as soon as we kind of get through our presentation. We'll try to get through things quickly because obviously we want to hear from you. But we think there's going to be sort of three sort of big, broad categories of things for discussion tonight, and that's housing types, designs, ownership, the affordability piece, kind of the where and the what across the spectrum of this 140 acres. 140 acres is a huge piece of property. And so when you think about the planning trajectory for this, it becomes really important that we think about the other topic, which is how it gets phased and triggered and how all of this moves forward in an orderly fashion. Jackie brought up the environmental features. This definitely has some environmental considerations that we're trying to really tune into with some precision. Our team will talk about that in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to start just with a little bit higher view of, what would happen if this weren't a PUD, because the staff report describes some of the adjacent development, and so we try to think about how do we transition from what's all around this site to the site, and take into consideration it was first a PUD actually in 1995. There's probably not very many people in this room who remember Don Hastings, who was the planning director at the time. So this has been swirling around in various stages for about 25 years, almost 30 years. And when the city did its rezoning and eliminated some PUDs and went through that process, this one stayed in place. And I think the reason it stayed in place is because it's important that this be developed under the comprehensive plan as a PUD. So we've looked at, of course, the existing planning documents. There was a 2019 study visioning specifically for this project, which was the Schmidt study. I don't know if you've seen that, and we can certainly provide copies to the Plan Commission if you haven't, but it really calls for this idea of mixed uses and neighborhood centers. And so our proposal works to accomplish that objective. In the comprehensive plan, as Jackie pointed out, calls for neighborhood center, mixed residential, and is a focus area that's really largely focused on residential, but we've really got to incorporate this idea of supportive services and commercial development that goes with that. Public infrastructure, we're happy to work with the Bloomington Fire Department to really look at locating a fire station there as part of this project to really help in that area because there's not one. And so there's going to need to be one, and also deal with the extension of the trail systems and provide that trailhead that was referenced earlier. The utilities infrastructure is going to be an important consideration, and you'll hear a bit more about that later tonight as well. And if we looked at just a traditional, what would this be zoned? If you were going to zone it something and it wasn't a PUD, and I think we lose a lot because we don't have the infrastructure commitments, the affordable housing commitments, the owner occupancy commitments, the conformity and development standards, and we really have this huge parcel of property that's pretty overwhelming. So our goal was to really develop this in phases and tranches that make sense based on putting infrastructure in place, putting roads in place, dealing with utilities. And I want to talk a little bit briefly about what the petitioner's commitment is here. So the commitment to the PUD and moving forward is there's really highly desired and needed mix of housing types. And so this covers the whole gamut of housing types. There is a commitment to affordable units and owner occupancy. Those are required if we're going to be a PUD. It wasn't in the original PUD, but we're obviously going to incorporate that, and I think we'll see higher levels than the minimums that were talked about earlier. The neighborhood center, which is retail, office, commercial, and supportive services. Adams and Sudbury, you've heard about, the fire station, the trailhead. It's really our goal to recast the vision of what this PUD could be, and then put it in motion and start phasing it with this development plan. The principles that are articulated in the 2019 Schmidt Vision Plan and the city's comp plan include these high-value design features. It's designated residential, neighborhood residential in the comp plan. We're really looking to add public space, a district center, green space, trails, tree preservation, environmental conservation is a part of our plan. We want to create neighborhoods that promote mixed uses, walkability, affordability, owner occupancy, and increase the housing stock. The PUD is the right path to give effect to this scale of development on this multi-year project, and the requirements to do so are met here. I think the discussion is in these overarching vision and the values about what we want to accomplish in this plan and how do we get there. So we really are looking forward to your comments and feedback and hope that we can get that tonight and really listen to what your concerns and ideas and vision are for this. I mean, this is a massive scale development. There's, as the staff report points out, there are not a lot of these opportunities left in the city of Bloomington right now. And so we really want to make sure we do it the right way. And so hitting the pause button here to really listen is important to us. So I want to very quickly introduce the team and then call on another person to come up. So we have Tyler Ridge here, who is one of the co-developers from the Ridge Group. Adam Canola is with him from the Ridge Group. Travis Vinsel, whom many of you know, from Sullivan Development, is a co-developer. We have our architect, Billy Ponco, here, as well as our lead engineer from Stantec, Jared Ward. So that's the team that's here tonight. That's only part of the team, as you can imagine, with a project this sizable. And I'd like to call for Tyler to come up and talk next. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Commission members. Appreciate everybody's time tonight. I know it's been a long night, and we'll try to get through this. Again, to reiterate, we're here looking for your feedback, looking for your input. We've kind of hit the pause button. Well, not the engineering front, but we as planning and uses have hit the pause button to get your feedback and really make this something we can all be proud of. Tyler Ridge, president of the Ridge Group, also managing member of Sudbury Development Partners, LLC. Leading the team, put together the team really that led to charge on purchasing this once-in-a-lifetime property. There's not many times you can put together 140 acres to develop in a top 3 market in the state. This is one of those, so we were aggressive and went after it. We closed on January 31st of 2023 after several meetings with various departments with the city, the mayor's office, planning, Alex Crowley, Jeff Underwood, you name it. We met with them to make sure this was the right move for us, after which we took the land down for $13.2 million, so significant investment for us. $13,158,000. Chris, I see you writing it down. So that's where we're at on the land. That does not include pre-development cost, but significant investment, an area we believe in, an area we're proud to be in, and again, appreciate your time. From inception, really, the city's vision, the city's needs, and our vision for the property aligned, and I still think today they align. Now, we still have a lot of detail to get through. As you know, Jackie's questions, we've been talking about these for going on 6 to 7 months, meeting weekly with Jackie, meeting weekly with the city. It's a lot to get through. It's a difficult process, but we're committed to do so, and we got the team to do so. And the need for this housing and infrastructure can only happen if the city participates in the main backbone or the public improvements and utilities, which we saw in the transportation plan in Adams and Sudbury Lane, and whether it's Wapahani or Countryside or whatever we figure out on the southern portion. But we will need support on these roadways. We have initial estimates, very expensive to get this done. I mean, I think Adams is 1.3 miles long. So, I mean, just to put in perspective how large this development is, 1.2 or 1.3, but a large development. So again, I'll bring up someone smarter than me, knows more about the development, and Travis, but we want to thank everybody for your time. Thank the mayor's office, thank planning, utilities, transportation, parks, and everybody else that's been dealing with us. So we appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks, Tyler. Travis Vinsel with Sullivan Development. I'd asked for you to let me have a few minutes extra if I go over, because I don't want to address a lot of staff's comments, but there's a couple I'd like to address, so I might go a couple minutes over. I think for a project this size, if I can go just a couple minutes over, that'd be great, but I might be close. Jackie will put me to the test, see if I can do it here. So, you know, when we took a look at this property, we really wanted to come across a broad approach to providing a diversity of housing that would really be impactful for Bloomington. We haven't had the opportunity to do that for a long time in this community. I think the last time that we did a development anywhere close to this, I was on your side, sitting up there at that seats and having several meetings, and I think it took 3 or 4 to get through the process. So I understand and appreciate that. We're really looking for a project that brings that critical mass there. So the commercial works, so all the pieces work. If you want to move to the next slide, Jackie. You know, the concept is to be responsive. For this plan, that's a multi-year plan, to be responsive to the comprehensive plan, the transportation plan, the Schmidt vision. And we think we've done that by creating these 5 neighborhoods that we have. And as Jackie has so well defined them, I don't want to go into a lot of detail about each one, but if you'll move to the next slide, I think we can start to talk a little bit and answer a couple of Jackie's questions here. If you start to look at how these 5 neighborhoods overlay in the context of the existing, we obviously have some different pressures. And so when we look at District 1 there, we are considering how to add another use table that will bring down the scale of some of that development in that area and put more concentrate on smaller scale owner-occupied affordability within District 1 as well as within District 2. So look for that to come forward. So instead of 3 zoning districts, I think we'll end up with 5. At the same time, in Area 3, where staff has said, does the MN need to extend that far? I think you'll see us also bring that down in scale and size a little bit in that area so that our MN district will be closer. Look for us to add some conservancy areas that you don't see here that we'll talk about. And also look for us, so a little bit of history. The alignment of Sudbury has changed several times over the last 4 or 5 months, and it is now the boundary to the north between us and Arbor Ridge. With that, Area 5 has changed, and we look to see some changes to how that frontage interacts with the neighboring property to the north to bring down that scale, as Jackie and staff have pointed out. So we might not change the uses, but we might very well change the scale along Sudbury on the south side to give more of a buffer between the existing development to the north and our project. If you want to move on to the next slide, staff showed you this. This is just a scale drawing of building types that can fit on the site. If we look at this to the south, we do believe there'll be a preservation area along Adams at the south. We obviously agree that there will be a fire station, and it won't be a big square building like the one you see there. It will be a scale and appropriate from the fire department, and we will look for transition along the north. But we want to talk about what we're getting out of this too. And at the same time, in the next slide, Jackie, you'll see that we're getting some public space. This is something that Bloomington has often talked about they wanted to have in a new development, but hasn't had the opportunity to get this. So we believe that this Ever Center community space with its green space that connects to the trail and flows between the neighborhoods and the mixed center district will be a really positive aspect, not only for those that live on this 140 acres, but those that live adjacent to it on that side of the community that don't have a lot of opportunities today to have a community center and have these kind of aspects, that they'll have those there. I have a couple more slides of just how we envision that area interacting with a pedestrian walkway, appropriate scaled buildings. But with that has to come some density, and so we do see some density on the project where you will have some projects that use all the incentives, and to achieve that, we do anticipate that when someone uses all those incentives, that will be exceeding what's required by the PUD. It may do that in a variety of ways, and we're still working with staff and to come together with those proposals as well. Again, talking about public spaces, we envision the fire station, the trailhead. It's exciting. As a member of the Parks Foundation Board, we're always looking at opportunities to get more of the public to be on other parts of our trail system. And the idea that this brand new trail that will be constructed sometime next year could have a trailhead off of Adams is exciting to us. Let's talk a little bit about housing diversity types. You can start to see on the next slide that we have in this depiction, a much more gridded small lot areas than what you see on the larger scale. So as we're refining this, we are going to have that diversity of housing types located throughout the 4 neighborhoods that surround the Everest District. This is a zoom in on Shasta Meadow, the one to the west, where you can see that we're preserving the wetlands to the west along Weimer Road, but then having a scaled neighborhood that has alleys and streets and opportunities for smaller scale development, as well as a mixture of residential uses along the perimeter. Same with Denali Woods. On the next slide, you can see how that is going to preserve some trees as well as have some residential uses and interaction in a mixed-use environment. I want to talk a little bit about the environmental preservation that we're anticipating. The yellow you see here is either tree preservation, wetlands preservation, the stream preservation through the center of the site, or karst features. And as you can see these, when you lay these in here, and we're going to try to preserve as much of this we can, we have some conflicts. Those conflicts specifically, in the next slide, are where we are connecting Adams, Sudbury with the inner of the development. And at these places is a convergence of trees, slopes, and karst. To put it simple, if we want Sudbury to go through, and we want Adams to go through, and we want a walkable community, we're going to have those conflicts. So we're not proposing that we build on slopes everywhere. We're proposing that when we have these conflicts, we're going to have some flexibility of how do we build a road next to a sinkhole on a slope that's greater than we really want to, but gives our community the overall benefit of connectivity and not a dead-end road that stops at a sinkhole or stops because the slope gets too straight. We've built a lot of roads over sinkholes in this community, and we're not proposing that's the way we approach it, but sometimes the benefit of connectivity, walkability, and connection has to be weighed against the constraints that we have. Would it be easier to take Adams off our property and through the county land and through the community park, as is shown in the transportation plan? Yes, and we might not have the environmental features, but you wouldn't have the benefit of Adams in this project and someone developing it as well. So that's really a very high level of our project. We're really looking for feedback tonight, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Angela, and happy to answer questions.
Oh, I have 3 minutes and 23 seconds. Oh my gosh, I talked as fast as I could too. Okay, so I just wanted to review. These are kind of the 3 big areas that we're really hoping to get a lot of feedback. And on the next slide, I want to kind of talk about what we're doing. So these are things we're working on right now. One is Travis referred to the additional district types that we're probably going to end up with 5 to really narrow that housing option in less intense mixed use areas. We've got a site visit with the Environmental Commission this week on site, so we're looking forward to that. We're meeting with Arbor Ridge. A lot of you are from Arbor Ridge, so thank you for being here. We're meeting with your board on Monday next week. Tuesday, sorry, wrong day. We've already met with them once to really talk about, the things they're concerned about, which are traffic and the transition to their neighborhood. Of course, we would all be concerned about that, so we want to hear their feedback as well. We're working with economic development and HAND in the city to really work on, how do we deal with city support and funding for infrastructure, because that's a really important ingredient here, so you should just know that. It was referenced about the utility infrastructure study. That'll be done by the end of July. We'll have more information in August. That's really going to affect that triggers and timing and phasing and all of those things. There's a housing study that's about to come out that we think will give us some important information about housing and what the needs are so that we can zero in on that in a more effective way. We've talked about traffic studies, and we've got a consultant on board to really help us start evaluating that question and some of the problem areas near and adjacent to that site. And then back to that whole trigger question and how we deal with that. So those are all things that we're working with planning on. We're extremely grateful, and I have to say it again, it's been said, to Scott and Jackie and their staff and the other departments that we've worked with. We meet with them every week, and I'm sure they're sick and tired of us. But we really, truly do appreciate and feel like we've made a lot of good progress, and we'd like to see that continue. So with that, we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions that we can respond to. Thank you.
Thank you all for that great, thorough presentation, staff and petitioners alike. I know there's a lot to talk about here, and we are already indicating that this will cover several meetings, and I don't know what the logical approach is to this. I certainly want to make sure we afford time for people who are here today who want to speak on behalf of this. So I don't want the commissioners to chew up all the time. Although that's kind of how things work. We get to ask questions for a little while. Do we ever set a time for our commissioners' questions?
Michael Rooker, City Attorney, your rules do not indicate that there's any limit on the time that commissioners are allowed to ask questions to staff or the petitioner. You certainly could create your own protocol if you want for this petition on this night. You have some other options, of course, as well, just for the benefit of the members of the public. The Plan Commission's rules and regulations state that each member of the public is entitled to 5 minutes of public comment. We have a lot of public interest in this particular petition. There is going to be at least one additional meeting, I think, on this petition, possibly two, where there will be additional opportunities for public comment. Sometimes in the past, what a body will do, or what this commission has done when there's a lot of public interest and there are going to be subsequent meetings, is you might vote to reduce the amount of public comment time per speaker to 3 minutes so that everybody has an opportunity to speak. You also have the option of extending that time, the adjournment time, from 9:30 to 10 or 10:30 if that's something the commission is interested in. Sorry to go on and on, but just as a reminder, if you want to make those sorts of changes, it does require unanimity from the Plan Commission. So.
All right, and then one other thing, Mike, to just ask about is, do we, I do think it would be wise for us to make sure that we get some time for public in here. Can we limit ourselves? I mean, is that?
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can do that if you like. You can vote to set a limit on the amount of time you can ask questions. You'll see the City Council do that frequently with certain items on their agenda.
Okay.
So.
All right, I'm not going to presuppose we're going to exceed our limit first. So why don't we begin with some questions? And again, public who are here, I do think that we're trying to all achieve some greater understanding about this and make the requested suggestions to the petitioners about what they want to see in this as well. So, all right, I'm going to just start. Maybe I'll start to the left here. Anybody on the left-hand side has them? If you... Sure, that would help us.
It's what we went over, but it might be easier.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
If that's appropriate, I wanted to give
Thank you.
a hard copy.
Thank you very much.
You didn't get it done.
All right.
I guess,
Okay, yep, and there's probably lots of ways we could approach this, but go ahead with specific questions right away.
okay, I appreciate there is a lot here. I'm going to keep just, I think, two basic questions I have. One, I think I wanted to circle back to staff. In reading the staff report, there was a lot of discussion about parking and parking lots. Could you just touch on that at least?
I avoided some of the more specific things, so sorry, this one was important to mention. So this goes to the question of setting kind of time limits for things. So one of the things that they would like to do is allow for surface parking as the properties develop. So the idea would be, as one or two multifamily or attached homes properties develops, a separate property could be developed just as a parking lot. It would be built to our parking lot standards of landscaping and all those types of things, as amended by the PUD. And then we would have a sunset on that. So it would be, we all would have to determine an amount of time. So the idea is that they want to have that until the kind of density of people there reaches a certain level, that then they would build structured parking. So so if all went well on the development side, in the course of whatever number of years we set, in the use-specific standards, for example, if we said 3 years, if all is going well with their development in 3 years, then at the 3-year mark, they would be getting a site plan to build a parking garage there. And if they're not ready to do that, they would still have to take out the parking lot and just put it back to grass. So we're working with them on that. It's very atypical. Obviously, you know, in Bloomington, we don't allow just surface parking on its own. So it's something that we're kind of exploring with them that we wouldn't consider without some sort of, like I said, tipping point where a time, not a tipping point, sorry, a point in time that it would have to come out, whether they were ready to, you know, make it more intensely developed or not. And then they had a second use that's similar off-site parking, surface parking lot shared, that would basically be doing shared parking, which we do allow and encourage, but on like a third lot as opposed to on a development site's lot. So that's something where kind of working with them on splitting those definitions. What are the two things mean? And then is that reasonable? And can we figure out a way to do it that's not, you know, detrimental to the area?
My other question maybe relates to that, but and I'm not sure if it's for staff or the petitioner, but it's just the discussion about timeframes. So whether it's a parking lot that has a certain time frame, or we're just looking at the general delivery timeframes that were being shared, like, I guess, what does that mean? Like, what is a delivery time frame? Is that when something starts, or is that from start to finish? Is it just a best guess? Is there accountability? Just trying to understand what that means.
Great questions. What does timing mean? So in the broad scope, it will take us about 12 months to develop any land and get the infrastructure in, and then it'll take about 24 months to build any product on top of that. So if we start next spring, we're 3 years out to providing projects. So when we talk about timing, we talk about when it's delivered, when that piece of property is done. So when you see 26, 28, that's product being delivered during that time period of 2026 to 2028. So when we talk about a time frame associated with the surface lot, we would say we might build a surface lot for the purposes of constructing other buildings and having residents park for a period of time. Once it was done, it was as signed off by staff, then it would have a period at which it could be there, to which it either had to be turned back into grass, converted to a parking structure, or somebody might purchase that piece of property and build a building with parking and self-sufficient on it. So we have some flexibility there of how it goes. Same with the shared parking. We allow shared parking now, but it's either owned by one or the other of the sharees. It's not jointly owned by the two. So we're envisioning there might be a shared lot that is owned by two individuals, separate LLC or entity owns it, and they share that parking lot as opposed to I owning it and sharing it with you. But again, that would not have the fixed time necessarily that we would be using.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Seaborn. I'm going to take your lead here and say maybe we could plan on asking maybe 2 questions to allow everybody to kind of go through, and then we can see how we're doing with time. But that may be a way to get some big issues out. If people can disagree with me, but that might be something to try and follow. All right.
My question is for Jackie. Just if you could clarify about the extra levels for, you know, with the incentives. So please clarify what we have now, and then what do we get with incentives? Because what I'm hearing is they're going to get 3 extra floors without incentives.
Okay, yes, I will prepare a little table for this next time. I didn't end up having time today. So basically, under our current zoning, in the district that they've chosen, in MN, the height max is 3 stories. And then the incentives that we offer in Chapter 4 would allow for an extra 2.5 stories if you're doing both affordable and sustainable. So that puts you at 5.5 stories, which means 5 stories and then a 6th story that's set back. But in their base zoning districts, or in their base zoning heights, for example, for the MN, it's kind of confusing because they say different things in different parts of the narrative, but it's basically like 5 to 8 stories for the MN. So that means just in their PUD, if you're building an MN, whether or not you're putting affordable or sustainable in that building at all, you can build 8 stories. And then if you choose to do the incentives, you can get the extra 2.5 floors. So now you're at 10 floors, with half on the back, so 11 stories. So our concern is, there's of course the concern, is that appropriate height-wise, period. But also, what is the benefit to the community of allowing something that's twice the size of what we would normally allow if you're doing both incentives? Like, what are we kind of getting from that, I guess?
Are they allowed to do that?
Well, yeah,
Because it's a
because in the PUD situation, right, they're writing their own rules. So currently, if what they
Okay.
have written goes through, that is what the rule will be. So we are just saying you all and us need to kind of really look at it and try to parse out like what the possible outcomes are based on what they're proposing for their district ordinance, for their own rules, to make sure that we're comfortable saying, okay, 11 stories if you're doing 30% affordable, or 11 stories if you're doing a gold level, are we going to propose to them different incentives than what they have included? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
My second question is, and this is for the developer, what do you envision here? Owner occupied? I see that you have, the smaller homes, single-family homes on the first phase, but then I see a lot of square buildings. Are those rentals? Are you looking for people owning their own flats? I mean, what do you have in mind here?
We really are encouraging and designing our project to be a diverse type of housing type. So there, in the taller buildings, there would be an opportunity for condo ownership, and ownership that wouldn't be a traditional I own my land and the grass around it house, but an ownership opportunity that's much more of an urban style of home ownership, being a condo, as well as some apartments, as well as assisted living and those kind of facilities as well in the bigger buildings. We don't anticipate those bigger buildings will have big footprints like you see there as squares. Those are massing, okay, how many units and parking garages can we get on those? They would be smaller footprints, but they would be a variety type of housing options. We have a commitment to provide housing options that allow for ownership. It's really hard for us to legislate in a zoning ordinance that someone own it, but we can design the buildings and do covenants that require them to be capable of individual ownerships for individual housing units. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, honestly, I'll save my time and let the public speak to this. What I would say is the studies of housing, utility infrastructure, that's probably where I'll come with questions, because that's going to be a lot more data we can drill down on. I will say I think this is a very high risk, high reward opportunity for the developers and the community. I give you credit because it's been sitting for 25 years undeveloped. So, but I'll just defer time.
Thank you. All right, I'll go to that side then. Question?
I have several questions, but I know we're going to see this a couple of times. But I guess I'll just start with, I know you're looking at the environment and looking at the high level, the environmental features that you're talking about. Part of this is in the flood zone, is that correct? Okay. I know that's been rewritten, just we haven't seen the maps yet. And I see that you have those, I guess, the wetlands. So is that what you're speaking of, the flood area in there?
Yes, so the area along Weimer Road is both flood zone and wetlands. And that is a large preservation area along Weimer, which is here in the dark blue and the light blue. The dark blue represents the stream center line and 75 feet on both sides, as does the blue through the center of the site that represents that stream and the 75 feet on both sides of it. And that's where we get into those pinch points, and we're proposing in specific areas. And I really believe that we will come back and circle on the map. In this area, we want that last zone to be something less than 25 feet, so that we might not have that full 75 feet here. I believe that in in turn, we're going to be able to give more than 75 feet in other places. And so hopefully we won't have to draw a jagged legal description that looks just like that, and that we actually preserve more riparian area in total, but in certain areas, you know, we're just trying to be really straightforward today, saying we're building a lot of roads, crossing creeks, a lot of environmental features, and when we get down to the nitty-gritty, there's going to be places that we're going to have pinch points. And we want to be upfront and say, we want to address that here now, and let you know that we're going to do that. But yes, that big light blue is the floodway to the west. And that's why we think another connectivity to Weimer becomes really difficult and really expensive, and not in the best interest environmentally than connecting down further south where it's a little bit narrower and we can do a four-way stop with Wapahani.
Questions. Thank you to commissioners, because a lot of my questions have been asked about. One's for staff, one is for the petitioner. Ms. Scanlon, can you mentioned a couple times that the roads aren't in a grid. Were you referring to like a north-south grid? Okay, and what's the value of that?
I think, well, the value of a grid, there are lots of things about it,
No,
right?
but like the north-south.
Well,
like-
because the two roads we're getting for the transportation plan are already north, south, east, west. So it's like the main roads we're getting are generally east, west, north, south, and then the roads inside are like off-centered. And so maybe that's useful and valuable. We just want to have that, we just want to keep having that conversation. So like, for example, the roads in Area 3 on the east side are all north, south, east, west, in line with how Sudbury is there. And just wondering, can that be extended across?
Okay. I guess it just changes sort of the lots. If you were going to do that and force it on the other areas, they now become skewed because they are square. But, okay, second question is for the petitioner, and it's really about the format. And Ms. Scanlon's comment about the UDO basically being put in with changes. I think it was done to be helpful and comprehensive. I think it's really confusing because I'm not totally sure what's different, to her point. So I'm looking for next time, and you could tell us why you did it, and I'm sure there's a good reason, but something where, I mean, it's what we're used to. It's here's how we're changing it from the UDO, but everything else is the same. Because I'm not really sure what's what. For example, there's a mention here of the bikes. There's not as many deviating, so.
So thank you. It is a good question, and this is complicated because usually our PDs have one or two uses and don't have a whole lot of this, and are not being developed over a 8-9 year period. And we're trying to anticipate what that is, and we're also trying to do a development that's cohesive. If you look at Adams Street to the south and you look at Adams Street to the north where we'll connect, they're not the same. That's because there's different organizations that have different rules over a period of time and created a different standard. We want to make sure that the standard for this project, it's a PUD, that when you choose to live in this community, you know what's going to be across the street. You know that your sidewalk is going to be 8 foot and your tree plot's going to be 6 foot because that's what the transportation calls, and we're not going to vary from it, and we're not going to ask for differences along the way. It's going to be one tree plot, and it's consistent throughout. If we default to the UDO and the discussion of earlier tonight goes forward and you change the tree plot, Subdivision 1 has 5 foot sidewalks and Subdivision 2 has 6 foot sidewalks. We don't want that. We want consistency across the board. So that's what we're trying to do. So we are going to put together a document that goes down and bullet points what's different. But let's take a siding, for example. We tried to simplify the siding, exterior materials. There are several different zones that have different materials. So we're consistent. In all our zones, we have the same consistency materials that could be used. We want to lock that in. Plan Commission may decide 3 years from now that every building has to have limestone on it. We don't want to be subject to that change. We want to lock it in. We're building this development over 9 years. Limestone's a possibility, but we're locked into that. We know what we're planning here for the future. So it's a combination of some variances and locking some things in. And that makes it difficult. I think we cut 60 pages out of the document already at staff's request. We had a whole bunch of landscaping in there. We took it out, and we're defaulting. So we had a lot more environmental in there, and we took it out. So we're continuing to work with that. I think we will have some more that come out, but I think we'll have parts that are in there because we want to codify that so that we know, the community knows, that this is the standard of Summit District. So I hope that's helpful, and we're working on that bullet point of here's what's different.
Well, I'm going to need that for sure to be able, I would guess, yeah, to know what's different. It's just how we have done it before, and it is too difficult to go through. But yeah, I understand the high risk, high reward. You have to know. So thank you.
Thanks.
I don't want to ignore our Zoom colleagues here. Commissioner Smith and Enright Randolph, anything from you?
I'd like to just I'd like to thank everybody for that. It really looks like a great project. I think my concern was from the pictures on the slides that showed lots of big apartment complex looking things in it. And you know what was on the screen, and I think maybe what Mr. Venzel was saying, you know, that it was going to be a variety of and you know, mix different residential things, and that's the goal. That's, you know, that's really where I'm thinking it would be really beneficial for our community to have. If anybody wants to comment on that, you know, about, you know, when I looked at the pictures we saw on the screen, they look like an awful lot of big apartment complex type buildings. You want to comment on that? At least, and that's part of my feedback for you guys, and I know you would like to hear what we're thinking, so.
Travis Venzel again, thank you. I think overall my comment would be those are building blocks. Those are pieces that we're using to calculate density, block lengths, calculate how many cars can fit in here, how much retail space we have, that's then reflected in the narrative of the report. I think as we move forward and we refine that, we will start to show you pictures of what actual buildings are going to look more like. We're not going to design every building. This is a long time project. We're not going to be able to show you this is what this building on this block is going to look like. But it's not going to be 4 squares identical to each other in a block. But at this time, when we start moving streets and talking about how wide our streets are and our parking areas, we have to use those building blocks to be able to calculate how many units, how much massing we have in each block so we're consistent. So in the months to come, look for more refinement on what those building types look like. Billy is here taking in your comments, and he's the one that's going to be overseeing our design standards, and you will see more specifics on those as we go in the future.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Venzel. I appreciate it.
Yes, I have something to say. A lot of the questions I had were already asked, so I just have a really brief comment. And I'll just go ahead and read it. I'll just thank you for proposing a PUD for this area, but 140 acres for a planned unit development needs to have a public benefit to the community. This plan could provide that benefit, but phasing and triggers are difficult to administer. The language that triggers different types of developments or build outs or moving to the next phase need to be very detailed. A term like units is a little vague. A breakdown of what type of units. Is it going to be residential, commercial, like options to buy, and what type of infrastructure, and when is that determined and triggered should be part of this proposal. Like the city stated earlier, there have been PUDs in the past where they hit certain thresholds and then they stopped developing, and we lost some of that public benefit. We really need to have that incorporated in this plan so it does provide that community benefit that a PUD should provide. We need a PUD that is predictable. That's basically what I'm getting at. Also, I do think environmental protections and developments can coexist. So again, that goes back to the plan that's being proposed. And when you get to that part of it, just those details are going to be extremely important. And that's my comment.
Thank you. I think both of those could probably be turned into questions for this stage of the presentation or the meeting, but I'm going to let them go for right now. I'll restrain myself to two questions right now. One is about the Arbor Ridge interface, and I would like to hear a little bit more about some of the thinking behind how that's going to be decided and how that might, what factors might consider into what gets built close to Arbor Ridge.
Yeah, so I think two things. One is we want to continue to talk with Arbor Ridge. We've had one meeting, we're going to have more. So we'll look for input from them that will help us design that. And I think it will be either expressed in two ways. One is a zoning classification, zoning type, district, whatever we end up calling it, that is along that frontage, that specifies what that transition is. In the current UDO, we have transition zones. I'm not sure we need another transition zone here other than calling it out. So I think that's one way we might do it. Another way we might do it is an overlay type of thing where it just says the buildings on this half of the block or this side of the street, you know, have a different height or have a different density or intensity that we use to help buffer that. I think it'll be one of those two things. It is a street that's going to create most of that buffer, so I don't think we're talking about a big distance of green space or landscaping that we might see. I think we might talk about elevation of the existing grade there. There is some existing grade that could come down so that when we, instead of building on top of the hill across the street from Arbor Ridge, we could be talking about, okay, how can we start at a level that is more consistent with their starting level? So those are the ways I think we would approach that as we go forward and listen to them.
And then the only other question is about the concerns about traffic entry and exit. Can you talk a little bit about when the traffic study will be done and how that will affect?
So we're kicking off the traffic analysis, I think Thursday morning. Am I right, Andrew? If I can remember my dates. We think it's imperative that we first decided when Sudbury and Adams are going to be built. And then we engage a traffic consultant that knows the timeframes of the development based on that. The second piece is we have to have our phasing worked out and our timing and our months of phasing so we can provide that to the traffic analysis that says, okay, this is phase one and it's coming from this direction because of sewer, not because of roads. And these are the roads that are going to be in place. Now tell us how that affects the traffic. So that's why it's sort of falling behind. Again, this isn't an existing parcel with two entrances on one road and we're saying we're going to do 250 units, what's its effect? It's like, well, if we build this road first, how does that affect the traffic count? If we build that road last, how does it affect that traffic count? Is that helpful?
Yeah. Yes, complicated. Okay. That's why. Yeah, that's right. Okay, all right. I don't know if anybody has a burning question, but I am very interested to hear what community members have to say about this. So are we okay if we suspend our questions right now? And I think we'll probably have some more comments as we move through here, but.
Yeah, so a couple of things. You could ask, sometimes they do at council, how many of you are planning to speak, and then you can decide if you want to do 3 or 5 minutes. And also by 9:15, you'll want to, or you could do it now, talk about extending your time. You all have to unanimously agree, otherwise we have to end at 9:30. We would recommend, obviously, that you extend it to make sure that everyone can at least speak. We just like to be here, so.
All right. Why don't we try and at least get a show of hands? Who would like to speak here? All right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6? Okay.
And there are about 8 people on Zoom that aren't like city or news affiliated. I don't know that they're all planning to speak. I'm not quite sure how to poll them on that.
Okay. We could ask them if they would like to speak, that they could maybe, can they chat or no?
Sure, yeah. If you're on Zoom and you would like to speak, could you send a message to Jacqueline Scanlon and or raise your virtual hand so we can kind of get an idea of timing here?
Yeah, so if it's 6 here, that could take as long as 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And we would not be over our time, at least.
No one on Zoom is replying. Let me send a chat just to the whole group so everybody can see how to do it.
If you take less time, that's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
All right, try and get ourselves
I
organized.
don't see anything, so maybe you could probably go
Okay.
ahead and get started and then.
Okay, well, why don't, anybody has a better idea, why don't we get started? We'll go through the folks, sometimes it spurs somebody else to want to talk, so I don't feel that because you didn't raise your hand that you're, eliminated here. So you can still speak if you decide you're motivated. But we'll keep it definitely at 5 minutes, but, if you can take less, make your point. All right, are we good? And the way it works is you approach the podium and, we can kind of form a line if that's necessary, but whoever wants to get up and dash to the podium first, you can do that. And remember just to state your name, and then the clock will start. All right, it looks like we have a couple folks coming around here. Good, they're getting themselves. Oh, yes, and don't forget to sign. Yes, thank you very much. Yep, sign and state your name. Okay, excellent.
Just my name? Hi, my name's Kelly Wesley. I'm here as a homeowner in Arbor Ridge. I'm also a board member for the HOA. And my concern, and I think it's the concern of most of our neighbors, is Sudbury is going to be going along the back of our subdivision. And right now, as you know, we have a beautiful view. And we're not going to have that anymore. We understand that. But the fact that the taller buildings are going to be the ones closest to us is a very big concern for us. We definitely oppose that. We do have an apartment building on the other side, but there is a conservancy, and that completely blocks that view. Is there going to be some sort of barrier, visible barrier to block that view? Or is there some reason why those taller buildings have to be in that location? Can they be in a different location, farther away from our neighborhood? That's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name's Marcia Turner Shear. I'm also a member of the Arbor Ridge HOA Board. And of course, the homeowner in Arbor Ridge. And I want to reiterate what Kelly said about the buffer. I think that buffer between our neighborhood and the community is extremely important. As Travis and Angela said, we've met with them, we're continuing to talk with them, and they have assured us that that's one of the things that they are, going to do. But we want to make sure that it's a generous buffer between our small 48-unit neighborhood and this huge neighborhood that's going to be built. Again, the height is really a concern to me. When we talked to Angela and Travis originally, what I heard would be the maximum of any building would be 7 stories. But then to hear tonight that it might be as much as 10 is highly concerning, and we would definitely oppose that and would ask the commission not to approve anything above 7 stories. And then finally, we have already mentioned this to Angela and Travis, but I just want to mention it again, that we're very concerned that the roadways be done before construction is really started. Because right now, when you go into Arbor Ridge, you come to a dead end. There's literally no place to go. And we're way back in at the end of Sudbury, as was mentioned before, so we're kind of isolated. We know we won't continue to be isolated, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we don't have people coming through our neighborhood a lot, especially, more than we could really handle, because it is a very small neighborhood. So we want to make sure that the roadways are adequate to handle this very huge development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Deb Pekin. I am also an owner at Arbor Ridge Way. And we've talked a lot about Sudbury and Adams as roadways and made references to Weimer, but no one has talked about the condition and the size of Weimer as a road. It is a 2-lane road. There is no shoulder at all. It is not adequate for construction machinery to be traveling up and down Weimer. On the south end of Weimer, from Tap Road, or you could call it Country Club Road, or it's got 3 names or something, that direction, it's the 1-lane bridge to get up to Sudbury. And from Bloomfield Road and Weimer, there is such a steep embankment that one summer, it was so hot, somebody with a U-Haul embedded the frame of the trailer in the road because it's so steep that they bumped into it. So there's no construction, there's no cement truck, there's no giant hauling machine, there's no Caterpillar that is going to be able to make it to Sudbury, which is, yes, a very wide road, but no truck's going to get there if they have to come up. They can't come up the Bloomfield Road, and they can't come over the 1-lane bridge. So we really need to focus on access to even get to the existing portion of Sudbury before we can start talking about construction and where all of that equipment is going to go. So that is my one bugaboo for today. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
My name is John Scott, and I live in the Arbor Ridge development. I'm going to have to back Debbie up on her statement as to Weimer Road and Bloomfield Road. I happen to be a car collector. I ship a few cars, and every time I've had to ship a car, a truck has not been able to come into the neighborhood. They cannot cross the bridge at the lower end of Weimer, and they cannot make the turn from 2nd Street in, no matter which way, without getting hung up. But my main concern is the density. I think that the developer needs to come back with a concrete number. I'm very leery of a number of between 4,500 and 6,000. He gives a great presentation, and everything looks great. However, I've experienced the same thing in other cities. When you put that many people into that area, though it's 140 acres and it sounds like a lot, when you start talking 4,500 units, if you take an average of 3 people or 4 people per unit, now you're talking 12,000, 14,000 people being put into an area of 140 acres. I think the board needs to think, because you're going to be shaping the image of Bloomington, not just that area, but the rest of Bloomington. Any area where there's a lot of land and there's a pub development, you're going to find somebody coming in. Now, they say they're going to be there for the 8 years. What's to preclude them from deciding to sell off packages 3, 4, and 5? You know that whoever buys 3, 4, and 5 is going to come in and ask you for variances. He's not going to abide by what he bought. These people haven't abide by what they bought. They knew that under the President PUD, they could probably get maybe 3,000 units in there. If you can't make your money on the 3,000, then you shouldn't have bought the land. So my whole thing is density. This is something like 6 times the size of the hospital development. The hospital is 952 units. If they do 6,000, it's six times that development. So I think the board has to think that not only are you making changes to the area of Sudbury, but you are opening up to change the whole PUD development throughout the city. So I'm against the size, and I hate to say it, but with all the photos, it reminds me of all the Army bases I've lived on. And the board approved a development which is very similar. It's consisted of townhouses, 1 high-rise, and duplexes and singles. Drive through it, and you will not want to live there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Vivian Furnish. Thank you, Plan Commission, Commissioners, staff, for this opportunity. I will shoot off my quick questions first and then leave the comments towards the end. So first, the traffic study. How many days are you conducting that study? That's my first question. Are you, as Jackie has pointed out, are you going to account for when IU school starts and when students are back and all that? The second one is environmental study. As you have said earlier, there's a concern with the high rises or 8-story buildings being so close to Arbor Ridge. You're talking about digging down to start that building at a lower height or lower elevation. If you're familiar with the area, you dig 4 feet and you can hit water, possibly. And so it's going to be very difficult to start at a lower height. And so it's just not, yeah. So it'll be ideal, at least for us, to have the environmental study done before any of this begin. And then my comment is, so if you think about, I was just doing some quick stat research. Bloomington has a land area of 23 square miles. You convert that into acreage, that's 14,000 acres, roughly. Well, 140 is about 1% of that. Bloomington right now currently has about 40,000 units, housing units. That's probably a higher number than what it actually is, 40,000. This is going to plan for 4,500 to 6,000 units. So that's anywhere between 12% to 15% of the total units. So you're building on 1% of the land, 15% of the units. Does that make sense to anybody? From a traffic standpoint, that doesn't quite make sense to me. Plus, you're trying to attract people to come in. You know, there might be commercial usage. Restaurants in that center, people from outside of this neighborhoods are going to come in, so that's bringing more than 15% of the residents from Bloomington into this area. Plus, the more people know about this area, the more they're going to use the road from all different directions. So that's just a lot of people on 1% of our current acreage. So my second long comments is Bloomington, the city of Bloomington has done a housing study. And I just did a quick Google search too, and I don't quite remember the numbers, but you said in the housing study, in the next 10 years, you anticipate having 2,900 units. But this is going to add 4,500 to 6,000 units in the next 8 years. That's growing a little faster than what you have anticipated. And as you have said, this area has sat vacant for many years. And if we were able to plan for extra units all these past 25 years and still allow Bloomington to grow at such a fast pace compared to other cities in Indiana, then we have found a way to allow for extra units. So why the rush to develop this many units in the next 8 years? That's twice or 3 times the planned phase speed that you have anticipated. My third long comment is, when you think of a 8 to 10 story story condo, where people are just dying to buy, they're dying to own as a part of their property, where would that condo be? Wouldn't that be on a beach in Florida, right? Gulf Coast, somewhere? Is Bloomington that place that you see? I don't really see that. And people coming into Bloomington, yes, we have people that are connected to IU that are not from Indiana coming to Bloomington for different reasons. They might be more used to owning, spending tens of thousands of dollars, owning a piece of property that don't have grass. Yes, they might be more used to that, but the people in Indiana are not going to spend that much money owning a flat, an apartment in this part of Bloomington that's really not connected to a lot of different attractive areas, just to be honest, right? It's kind of industrial. If you're familiar with the land, there's a junkyard filled with cars nearby to the north. You're going to have a county jail. You're going to have just a lot of different variety of places around here. Are people going to spend that money buying a condo in Bloomington? So that's all. Thank you.
I can't do 2 things at once.
Okay.
My name is Mark Furnish, and she's the smart one. That's why she spoke first. So all I would say, yeah, we live right exactly where Sudbury Lane comes out and hits Weimer Road. And that's a very dangerous intersection. And we've almost had people basically run into our house trying to avoid each other and stuff. Weimer is not, excuse me, the local's Weimer. I'm from out of town. So Weimar does not handle, it's not good enough, big enough to handle the traffic now. And and that intersection, I don't know, I can easily see probably you're going to have a circle or something there eventually if you're going to up the traffic from what it is now. And, we really don't want to live on a circle. So, I mean, if this goes through, we probably will be leaving. We don't want to be around that, So that's one personal side. Oh, I would appeal to you personally, please personally take an interest in this. Please come out and look at the land. You can park. All my neighbors, if you came out and parked in their driveway and you said, hey, I'm on the planning board and I want to go out here and look at this, they would not be offended. They'd be happy that you took the personal interest to come out and take a look and really look at that land and see it really is environmentally fragile, okay? It wasn't good farmland, quite frankly, because it was all hilly, and you can actually see erosion. If you actually go out there and look at it, you can see erosion that occurred over the years when they farmed it. You can see rocks coming up through it, okay? And then there's a lot of flooding that occurs when we've had these big, any day that it rains a lot, drive down the road and see. I mean, there's flooding that happens. It's really bad down on South Weimar, but it's also bad along it where the creeks cross. It comes out of our property, crosses Weimar. So, if you're going to go through with this, my appeal is really make them do it right. Really make them do it right, please, So, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Rachel Noble. I'm a Weimar Road resident. Mark's my neighbor, and Vivian. I would just like everybody to remember us. I know we are of the 2 Mile Fringe, but I bought my property in 1992. It was right after Twin Lakes. At that time, the law was if I didn't ask the right question, nobody had to answer it. I asked, did that creek ever flood? And the answer correctly was it had never flooded. The creek, I'm the only person, the creek goes in front of my house. So 1993, the creek flooded, and it hit my house. The city at that time, who changed water flow with Twin Lakes, I had the sheriff stop at my house and say, the city did this to you. I had the city county attorney, Vicki Renfro, say, we've talked about buying your house because they changed the waterway. Now, what happened in the end, after lots of conversations, is that the neighborhood had to come up with a common solution for anybody to address what they did. That creek takes on more water now than it ever was supposed to handle. I gave up my driveway. The county, not the city, helped me. The city utilities director, Mike Phillips, I believe his name was, basically said, you're 2 Mile Fringe, we're not going to help you. The city attorneys and everything said everybody has to agree or we do nothing. So my point is, we already have a creek that takes on too much water. The city said, we're not helping you, you're 2 Mile Fringe. And so the county came in, bless their lovely hearts. They took the bridge out. They said they felt sorry for me. They said the city did this to you. They made a 100-year flood bridge right in front of my house. I took out my driveway, got permission to enter my property from my neighbor. So my question is, I ask all of you, I understand the property is going to be developed. I don't have a problem with that. But what are you going to do for storm water drainage? Is it going to go into the creek? Are you going to make sure that creek is wide enough and maintained enough so the water doesn't back up toward me? Because I already have too much water coming at me from Twin Lakes. Have you ever been by Twin Lakes when it really rains? It becomes a big pool of water that has to go through a creek. We have all been told as property owners that if you touch your property, you absolve the city of responsibility. So my only choice, if I flood, is to sue my neighbor Mark. And my Mark has to turn around and sue Kent Lawson, who has to sue the next person who owns that little tiny lake that was a spillover lake for Twin Lakes. So now you guys go to the other side and you do your development and the storm water goes into that creek. All I ask is you think about us little on 2 Mile Fringe people and the water impact, because on my property, you dig down 4 feet and you hit water. We are on a water table. There's no place for that water to go. The beavers, on a regular basis, build dams, and the creek does not flow.
The people, myself, up to the lake, Mark and the other ones, we work really hard, and again, thank you, county. They burned my property. We work really hard to keep the trees and the debris and things out of that. But what are you going to do? When Sudbury Road was built, that water sheared across the road and came right at me. I've got erosion, and I've got more water coming at me from across the road from Sudbury and the apartments. When I talked to the developer, he made a drainage pipe over there. But guess what? The property sold 3 times. So nobody cleans that out. It backs up. My husband will go over there and dig out the ditch to hope to keep the water on your side. But it invariably wants to go to where that creek is. So I don't know who wants to talk to us, but I just ask in this whole development picture that you remember there are some of us that our houses are on that creek, and I can't control what you do, but you will control whether I have a house in 5 years by your development. And I ask you think about that. And when I talked to the state about this, the environmental agency for the state, they told me that everything has to be maintained and cleaned out and so that doesn't happen, but they have no money to enforce these things. They want neighbors to like each other and get along and take care of these problems. Well, that doesn't work either. So please remember us, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I am Deb Allshouse. I'm an owner of Arbor Ridge and also of the board. And I just, I know I can't expect answers from you, and that's fine. But I do want to ask, are people going to be expected to come out or come into Bloomington from out of town, new people coming in, which is fine? Or are the people already here? My concern is if we get a large influx of people in the next 8 years, will the police be added to, to help with that? I know that there's going to be a fire station, which would be awesome, but I'm looking ahead at if there's more influx of people, I'm looking at safety, security. The dynamics of our neighborhood will change drastically, but just even for the people that are coming in there, and I know that will be a burden perhaps on the police that are already there. Then Rachel has already touched on this. I grew up on Weimer Road, and my folks have lived in 2 homes on Weimer Road, and we used to have a garden. We're back up to the remaining Twin Lake, and used to have a garden and things down, and the Millennium Apartments came in, which was fine. But all the water then shed down Weimer Road, roared down, and then hit onto our apartment to go down to the lake. And so we couldn't do anything on that land anymore. Took out the garden, but now there's a dip in the road, has been for quite some time. I think where there's a water, I don't know if it's a pipe or what, but it had to be fixed. But if you're on our land looking up to the road, there's quite a hole, and it's concerning. I'm concerning for someone on traffic may have a problem there someday, if the road collapses. Also, when I was a kid, there was a small, it could take about a person in us, so my father told me not to go near this sinkhole, and so we didn't. But now that the water has run for years right down there, the sinkhole is huge and starting to take trees and things in it. So I'm with Rachel in the watershed and everything else to please think about how things are done there. I'm concerned about the wetlands, down farther, just the oils, everything coming off the pavement, all that pavement from Millennium. I don't know how this will be done, but I just hope it doesn't cause more trouble for those living farther down, or again, for anyone on the creek and that type of thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else present in the room? And I saw some activity on Zoom. I think we might have some.
One on Zoom who would like to speak.
All right, can we go to our person on Zoom?
Yeah, Ms. Barry, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me? I think it doesn't do the video, but that's probably for the best. I really, I'm a recent condo buyer in Bloomington, and I just wanted to speak to the matter of interest in some tiny condos. Like my current one is like 240K. If there had been a little 60K one, like in a giant apartment, I would have gone on that in a flash. In fact, I'll take I could probably get you 50, 60 pre-orders if like that's on tap. And I think that could make a life-changing. I was lucky enough, Bank of Mom and Dad, we benefited from housing scarcity driven home price inflation in Bay Area, California, in the California, Taipei, Taiwan, got lots of cash. I just had to point to one to pick it out. Not so for most people, or for many people. Like housing scarcity, so far as I can, might be causing $300 or $400 a month increase in rent. Like the average price to build in Bloomington by some, Google estimates is like 100 per square foot. Okay, like so, it would be, people would love it, is my opinion. Obviously that I totally appreciate that, not to take away from any of the very serious like environmental things. I totally agree with all that, and really appreciate like how like neighborly and like public spirited people have been. Like I'm sure that I totally see the reasonable concerns. I totally feel that there are like whatever civic life involves like sacrifices, and we don't want too much to like land on any one people. And I really appreciate how everyone has like gone out of their way to kind of look out for other future neighbors and stuff like that. And like and even like think the police were mentioned, right? Think about the impact on ambitions, on life, on crime, right? If work pays and you can, easily, plausibly hope to like buy a home, maybe even to have a single parent, like not single parent, stay-at-home parent, this sort of thing, all the traditional American dream things, right? These are things enabled by like a good home price to median income ratio. When housing scarcity like messes that up and has it like skyrocket over the past 40 years, that itself, I imagine, has some impact on crime, on the social fabric, on the structure of people's lives, on younger people's hopes of building up retirement savings. So I think we all have interests that can work together, but I just really want to speak for would people like to buy really cheap condos and not own cars? Like I literally do not know how to drive. I'm 40. I'm not want to be, don't want to be cluttering up your roads. I just want to, I'm a university professor. I want to take the bus into my work, live frugally, use that capital for something more valuable than a fancy house, live in a nice, simple, green, environmental way with some other people. So yeah, I think there are lots of people who would love some tiny houses. Thanks. Tiny condos in the.
Thank you.
That's all.
Barry? Did we get a name on that one? It was Barry?
Sharon Berry.
Sharon Berry.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? You're here? Okay. All right. Not bad for time. Okay. Good job, everybody. So we have a little bit of time where we could go back to some commissioner comments or maybe some questions that were either perhaps motivated by some of the comments that our public
And the
offered.
petitioners have about a minute left, I think, if they have.
Okay. Do the petitioners want to take their minute remaining to respond to anything that was said? I know that's not very generous, but.
I'll just wrap it up really quickly. Angela Parker back again. Thank you for all the comments. We took copious notes, and we want to respond to those things and incorporate some of those. We'll meet with the HOA people at Arby Ridge, so we're aware of their concerns. So we do appreciate that. We don't have any more presentation material, but I just wanted to say that we'll wrap up. We appreciate the comments. We're willing to hear all of them that you have so that we can do this right. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I suspect that we have some comments based on this, and I think this is a great time for all commissioners to offer some explicit comments and suggestions for either what comes next in the next presentation, or it can be very specific to the proposal at hand here. So I don't know if anybody's got something on their mind right away. I'm gonna go this side first. Yeah.
All the neighbors that spoke. Your comments are extremely important. I I think this group will listen to it, just as Angela said. So really appreciate you taking the time, because we need to hear those comments. So it'll just make a better project in the end. So thank you.
Also thank the public. It's probably some of the most civil comments we have got from people that were thoughtful and not super angry and just really helpful to the process. For the petitioner, I'm glad to hear you took notes. I would expect that you would. And that the way, we operate, all those questions that the public asked, our experiences, we're all going to ask you all of those questions next time. So please don't gloss over any, because we will be asking them. It's what we do when the public brings up points, whether we agree with them or not. We want to make sure they get heard. I do think there were some number of really valid questions there. I'm sure you do as well. So I look forward to that, and thanks for your time, and to the public as well.
All right, I'll go down to this side.
Yeah, I really appreciate the public comments. They're always very vital for us in the decision-making process. I think I forgot your name over here, and I apologize for that, but I think that was a very good point you made in terms of the land density of like the 1% housing the 15% of the housing population. So I would like the petitioners to address that, because I think that the math makes sense, right? It's a highly dense compared to the land that it's going to cover. So if you guys, in this housing study that we are going to look at, hopefully at our next meeting, I'd like to be, at least that part be addressed a little bit in terms of how you guys are going to deal with, these are the units you want, how are we going to work with that density of that land? Because I think that was a very good point that was made by the public, and I appreciated that. That's all I have.
For the petitioners, I would like for you to focus on the environmental studies. Obviously, you can't just look at your land, at your piece of land only. You have to look as a whole, what is around you. The Twin Lakes is floods, and it brings water down to your place and Weimar Road. And it is a floodway, not a flood zone, but a floodway means it floods all the time. So those are things that need to be looked in. The creek, I think it's what they brought up in terms of keeping the creek well maintained, and so it maintains the water flowing. Of course, you are going to have a storm drainage study done. I'm sure you'll probably have some detention ponds or retention ponds or whatever it is that it's required by engineering to avoid. So in Indiana, of course, water is one of our biggest assets, but also one of our biggest problems. So because freezing and thawing and water everywhere. So it causes erosion. So pay good attention to your environmental studies. I also am concerned with, and I know you are as well, with the roads and which roads to build first, and how are you going to have the building traffic going in? Is it from Adams, from the south that will come in? Is it from Adams from the north that comes in? Are you going to use Sudbury to go? Of course, we just found out that Weimar Road is not, a very good road for trucks and big, heavy equipment. So anyway, several things for you to think about. I am listening to what you're saying, talking about the public, and I will be asking those questions next, in the next meeting. Thank you.
Try not to restate whatever everybody else has already said. I'm going to be very interested, and I'm sure staff will be, in the utility studies, and that's just, I know, a thing I imagine the development team is interested in. I'm also going to be really interested in just the transportation networks, and I think it's important to recall the context that this is an amendment to, or it's a new PUD, but there was a prior PUD that got to a point of hitting triggers, and so kind of keeping that in the back of our mind that in the past, certain things were built with the anticipation that future things would happen as well. So just keeping that in our mind. And I think one thing that would maybe be interesting, and it maybe gets to the point of the density and the number of units, just for reference, like I'd be curious, what does the current zoning ballpark, how many units would that allow versus what is being proposed? What does the height of the buildings do, and how does that impact the number count? What would the base, just standard UDO, just ballparking, like what are the incremental changes, and what's driving that, or what's the community benefit to that change? That's where I'm at right now.
Great. Why don't we go to our Zoom commissioners? Anything? Commissioner Smith? Yeah, go ahead. And right, Randolph.
Oh, I was referring to Ron. He's above me, so I guess that looked like I was raising my hand.
This is the
thanks.
Brady
I was
Bunch,
just
yeah.
gonna say- Yeah, the Brady Bunch, that's right. I was just going to say, lots of great information and lots of great potential in the development, and I'll, as well as I'm sure all the rest of us, we'll have more questions next time, and look forward to it. So thank you very much.
I guess I just have a general comment, and I just want to thank the petitioners for coming here to really kind of do some crowdsourcing, in my opinion, get our feedback, maybe get a sense of how they could move forward with this plan. I think the opportunity we have here could be very significant for the city. But again, I guess just to go back to my last comment is we need a PUD that's predictable. We need to make sure we incorporate that public benefit, and then also, have the right environmental protections. But, I really applaud them for coming here and being straightforward, letting us know from the jump what they need and what they're asking for, so we can provide good focused feedback. So that's my comment.
Thank you. All right, I have a couple suggestions for the group here. First, this is our last developable land in Bloomington, and I think we're all going to be pretty protective of what happens to it. So all of these questions are really appropriate, and I would urge the petitioners to go through, I think, the very thoughtful questions that have been outlined in our packet today. And to me, that's a very logical way to go through this, because in order for me to proceed on this, and I would imagine anyone else in the public who has now read this plan, they're going to ask these same questions. So they're going to hold these same questions and ask them of you. And the staff has done a lot of work to identify what these questions are. And they have all of these interests that are identified here that are environmental and specific to traffic and assuring that the work gets done. And I think this whole issue of density and affordability is a really significant one. So, your best approach would be to really go through and answer all of these questions, or have some answers for these. Now, the other thing I think that is clear from what the staff have laid out is the need to make sure that we can understand and work with the UDO that exists now. So as Commissioner St. John was saying, that we can't make this really challenging to read and figure out what is it that we're allowing and what are we giving up. So I think the more you can specify what it is that you want and what's so important to this development that you really can't proceed without those important elements, that's a very important place to start. And, I know the staff has some excellent ideas about how to create essentially you're creating a PUD UDO of your own. So how do you do that in a way that's understandable for the future? So I think that's this is a long-term project, and as Jackie Scanlon already indicated, we need to be able to make sure that the commissioners who are sitting here 8 years from now can continue to hold to the same standards. And we're not going to get a lot of exceptions and understand what it is that we've agreed to. So I think that's really important. A lot of those are real nitty-gritty details. The other thing, on a bigger scale, I think it's helpful for us to have a little bit more vision for what what you see here. And I know you can't get specific, this is too early in the process, but as I look at some of the images for Everest Center and the Everest Center community space that are included in the packet that we are provided, I think that helps all of us understand a little bit more about the kind of density, the kind of place and space we're talking about. So having a little bit more discussion about that and what you see happening in this space, I think would be helpful. The last thing I'll say is I really have some strong concerns about the environmental impact that we heard a lot more elaboration from the public today. The effect that it has on the existing developments is quite serious, and I do want to see more how that will be addressed. And the other comment that was made by staff about the width of that creek and how it can be afforded or how it can be managed more effectively is a real concern. And then the last piece that is about the gridding in the space, I think that really needs to be explained. Given the odd angles of this, we want this space to be seamless in some ways. I mean, I guess I need to understand, are each of these, Everest Center and the Shasta Meadow designed to look different, and therefore it makes sense for some of the roads to be oddly situated, or does it really behoove it to be much more gridded? So I need to understand why there are differences in that kind of road structure. Okay, that might be it for me right now. Phew, that was a lot. Okay, sorry, we're taking us right to the end. All right, anybody else have anything for the good of the order? I mean, we're trying to make this productive, not waste people's time, and make sure that the public knows where when and what they could help comment on. So I guess I would invite anyone coming to this isn't the end of this, and we do need to figure out how we're closing today's meeting. I think we're continuing this petition, and we probably need to figure out how so we can tell the public what's next.
Yeah, so you'll need to make a motion to continue. We have 4 minutes to get it done, or you'll have to.
Yep.
Yeah, and for the benefit of the public, since we've said several dates, let's please specifically state the date, time, and
Sure.
location of the next hearing on this.
Okay.
Thank you. Just a sec. Let me just make sure
Yep,
I don't want to
thank
tell you the
you.
wrong date. The location is City Hall, 401 North Morton Street. Council chambers, the time is 5:30 p.m. and the date is August 14th.
Okay, August 14th, 5:30.
So yeah, we need a motion to
So
continue
we need a
this
motion to
hearing
continue this petition to the August meeting.
So I'll make a motion to continue PUD-18-23 Sudbury Development Partners LLC to the next meeting on August 14th at 5:30 p.m. in this current location.
And available on Zoom. Yeah.
And available on Zoom.
Yes. Okay, we have a motion and second.
Yes.
And we need to vote on this?
Yes. St. John,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Seabour,
Yes.
Cockrum,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
and Smith. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, all right, we're adjourned for tonight. Thank you, everybody who came out, and thanks to everybody on Zoom. Thank you. Thanks.